Welcome back, my friend. Before we start the video, I really need your support. The channel is going through a tough time and your help means everything. Let's try to reach 1,000 likes and 1,000 comments. If everyone watching leaves just one like and one comment, we can easily make it happen. Don't forget to subscribe as well. And now, let's get started. In 1995, I worked as a forest ranger in the Klamath National Forest, the kind of job that made me feel like a rugged cowboy. Only instead of wrangling cattle, I wrangled campfire permits and told tourists not to feed the raccoons. My name's Derek Flint, and if there's one thing I've learned in all my years of doing this, it's that nature doesn't care about your plans. It doesn't care if you're having a bad day or if you forgot to pack a lunch. Nature just happens and you deal with it. My parents always told me I was born in the wrong era. They were right. I didn't care much for people or technology. My idea of social interaction was talking to the squirrels on my patrols. Not the best conversationalists, but they were good listeners. I wasn't exactly the kind of guy you'd find at a barbecue or a birthday party, and frankly, I was okay with that. That year it had been dry, too dry. Fires were always a concern, but when the heat hit like it had, every tree and bush seemed like it was just waiting for the chance to light up. We had been on high alert for weeks, and I had been making my rounds, covering ground where most rangers didn't bother going. It wasn't that I was a workaholic, but I liked the peace of the deeper woods. The Klamath was vast, ancient in a way that made you feel insignificant. Towering pines stretched toward the sky, creating shadows that danced across the forest floor. In the stillness of those woods, you could almost feel the weight of time pressing down on you. There was an old logging road I took sometimes, a narrow dirt track that twisted deeper into the forest than most people were willing to go. Officially, it was closed off, but that never stopped folks from trying. So I made a point to check it every now and then, make sure no one was setting up camp illegally or dumping trash. The summer heat had baked the earth hard, leaving clouds of dust in my wake as I navigated the rutted path. The air smelled of pine and dry soil, and the dense canopy overhead offered brief moments of relief from the relentless sun. My boots crunched against fallen needles, the sound echoing in the unnatural quiet. Most days I'd hear birds calling, the scurrying of small animals, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. But that afternoon, the forest had fallen silent. I should have recognized it for what it was, a warning. Animals know when something isn't right, when a predator is nearby. They go quiet, they hide, they survive. That day, though, I was the only one out there. At least that's what I thought. Now, you don't get too jumpy in my line of work. If every broken branch or rustle of leaves made you look over your shoulder, you wouldn't last long. But when I saw the pile of bones scattered near the trail, I knew something was off. Not like your average, oh, someone shot a deer and left the remains kind of thing. These bones were clean. Too clean. No tissue, no muscle. Not even the kind of gnaw marks you'd see if scavengers had gotten to it. Just bones laid out in a neat little pile like someone had been organizing them. I'm not a squeamish guy, but I knelt down to take a closer look. The bones weren't animal, at least not anything I could recognize. And trust me, I've seen every critter the Klamath has to offer, from mountain lions to coyotes. These were odd. They reminded me of human bones, but elongated, distorted in a way that made my stomach tighten. I stood up, feeling a knot forming in my gut. Something about this felt wrong, very wrong. The wind picked up slightly, bringing with it a sour smell that made my nostrils flare. Somewhere in the distance, a branch snapped. A shiver ran down my spine despite the heat, and for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't alone in these woods. But I brushed it off like I always did. It was probably some idiot messing around, trying to scare hikers, or maybe just a weird prank. I radioed back to the ranger station, told them I was checking an unusual site, but no need for backup. There was a pause on the other end before dispatch replied. Something in their tone that made me wish they'd just said, "Be careful." Little did I know that in a few hours, I'd be running for my life. That's when I heard the sound. It wasn't far off, just through the trees. It was this low hum, like the kind of sound a big piece of machinery makes when it's powering up. Only there was no machinery out there. No generators, no motors, just forest. I started walking toward it, feeling the pulse of the noise vibrate through my chest the closer I got. The sunlight dimmed as the trees grew denser, their branches knitting together overhead like gnarled fingers. Shadows deepened, and I found myself instinctively moving more cautiously, placing each foot with deliberate care to minimize sound. And then, I smelled it, a coppery stench like blood mixed with rot. It was a smell you don't forget, one that sticks in your nostrils like a bad memory. My hand moved to my belt, resting on the reassuring hardness of my hunting knife. Not much use against a bear, but better than nothing. The humming grew louder, rhythmic now, almost like a heartbeat. Sweat beaded on my forehead, though whether from the heat or from fear I couldn't tell. Part of me, the rational part, was screaming to turn back, to call for backup properly this time. But curiosity pushed me forward. 22 years in these woods, and I'd never encountered anything I couldn't explain. Until now. I saw movement ahead, just a flick of something big. Bigger than any animal I should have been seeing out here. My instincts told me to back off, but my feet kept moving forward, like I was being pulled by some unseen force. The trees opened into a small clearing, where sunlight streamed through in broken patches. I noticed odd markings on the ground. Not footprints exactly, but long, dragging impressions as if something heavy had been pulled across the forest floor. The humming had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed against my eardrums. When I finally saw it, my brain struggled to make sense of what I was looking at. It stood on two legs. Tall, easily 8 feet, maybe more, with arms that hung too low and bent in ways that didn't seem natural. Its skin was gray, leathery, but looked as though it had been stretched too tightly over a frame of bones that didn't quite fit. But the worst part was its face, or the lack of one. Where eyes and nose and a mouth should have been, there was just a smooth, featureless mask of skin. I froze. My body didn't want to move, didn't want to breathe. This wasn't like seeing a bear or a mountain lion. This thing wasn't from here. It wasn't from anywhere. It turned its head toward me, and I swear, even without eyes, it was looking right through me. That's when I saw the bodies. Half hidden in the undergrowth were what looked like 3 campers, or what was left of them. Torn apart like rag dolls, their limbs scattered around the clearing. One of them still had a backpack on, the bright red fabric now splattered with blood. The metallic smell of freshly spilled blood hung heavy in the air, mingling with something else, something musty and alien. Flies had already begun to gather, their incessant buzzing forming a grotesque soundtrack to the scene before me. A hiking boot lay several feet from its owner, the laces still neatly tied. This wasn't just some wild animal attack. This was methodical. It was deliberate. I could make out what remained of their camping gear. A half-collapsed tent, cooking equipment strewn about, a lantern still intact. They had probably set up here illegally, off the designated trails where no one would find them, no one except whatever this thing was. And me. The creature moved, and I snapped out of whatever trance I had been in. I grabbed my radio, fumbling to get the words out, but before I could even speak, the thing let out this sound, like a vibration, deep and unsettling, that hit me in the chest like a sledgehammer. It was a pulse of air that I felt more than heard, and it knocked the wind out of me. The radio slipped from my fingers, clattering against the rocks at my feet. I stumbled back, trying to get my footing, but it was already moving toward me, faster than anything that big should be able to. Its movements were fluid yet wrong, like watching a film played at slightly the wrong speed. It closed the distance between us with uncanny grace, and I caught a whiff of its scent like wet soil after rain, but with an undertone of something sickly sweet. My heart raced, adrenaline shooting through my veins as I turned and bolted, not caring where I was going, just needing to get away. I'd like to tell you I had some heroic plan, that I faced it down and fought back. But the truth is I ran like hell. My legs burned, lungs screaming for air, and all I could think about was that thing gaining on me. I made it to the edge of the clearing, darting between trees, trying to put distance between us. But I could hear it behind me, the snapping of branches, the rustle of leaves, then silence. I stopped, gasping for breath, ears straining to catch any sound. But there was nothing, just the quiet of the forest, as if the thing had never been there. The sun was beginning to sink lower in the sky, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for me like grasping fingers. I didn't wait around to find out if it was gone for good. I radioed for help again, this time not caring about sounding scared. I told them where I was, that I needed someone here fast, and that something had killed those campers. The dispatcher's voice came back garbled, full of static, but I caught enough to know they were sending people my way. The logging road was about a quarter-mile east of where I stood. If I could make it there, I'd have a clear path back to the ranger station. I set off, moving as quietly as I could, constantly scanning my surroundings. Every shadow seemed to shift and move. Every sound, a pine cone dropping, a distant bird call, sent fresh adrenaline coursing through me. I'd made it maybe halfway to the road when I felt it. A change in the air pressure. A heaviness that descended like a blanket. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I knew without turning that it was behind me again. Not chasing, just watching, waiting. Sweat trickled down my back despite the cooling air. I kept moving, carefully placing one foot in front of the other, fighting the urge to break into a sprint. Running had triggered its pursuit before. Maybe walking would keep it at bay. The logical part of my brain tried to make sense of what I'd seen. Could it be some undiscovered animal species? A bear with a skin condition? A mountain lion that had somehow killed those campers and then been scared off by my arrival? But those explanations crumbled as soon as they formed. I knew what I'd seen, even if it defied everything I understood about the natural world. As I walked, I became aware of a soft sound, almost inaudible beneath the rustle of leaves and my own breathing. A rhythmic clicking, like the sound of fingernails tapping on wood. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The logging road appeared ahead, a ribbon of dirt cutting through the trees. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Standing in the middle of the road, perfectly still, was the creature. It hadn't been following me. It had been hurting me. I ducked behind a thick pine trunk, my heart hammering so loudly I was certain it could hear it. How had it gotten ahead of me? The thing stood motionless, its featureless face turned in my general direction. The clicking sound grew louder, emanating from the creature itself. Minutes passed like hours as I remained frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. The shadows lengthened as dusk approached, and with it came a bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The creature finally moved, turning away from me and walking down the road with that same unnatural gait. Too fluid, too precise. When it disappeared around a bend, I waited another 5 minutes before emerging from my hiding place. My legs felt like rubber, barely supporting my weight as I stumbled onto the road. I headed in the opposite direction, constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that gray, faceless head watching me. The sky had turned a deep purple by the time I heard the rumble of an engine. Headlights cut through the gathering darkness, and I nearly collapsed with relief when I recognized the Forestry Service truck. 2 rangers, Jim Keller and Mike Sanchez, pulled up beside me, their faces etched with concern. "Jesus, Flint, you look like hell," Jim said, helping me into the truck. "What happened out there?" Mike asked, handing me a canteen of water. "Dispatch said something about campers?" I took a long drink, trying to organize my thoughts, to find words that wouldn't make me sound completely insane. "There's been some killings," I finally said. 3 campers up near the old fire lookout clearing. Something got to them. "Something like what, bear?" Jim asked, already reaching for his rifle. I hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe it was—" I didn't get a good look. It was a lie, and I think they knew it. But neither pressed me as we drove back to the site, the headlights cutting a meager swath through the encroaching darkness. I directed them as best I could, dreading what we might find, or worse, what might find us. When the backup arrived, the bodies were still there, the bones too. But the creature? Gone. The clearing looked different in the harsh beam of the truck's headlights and the powerful flashlights Jim and Mike carried. Shadows danced and shifted, making everything seem less real, more dreamlike. Part of me had hoped we wouldn't find anything, that maybe I'd hallucinated the whole thing, too much sun, not enough water, a moment of temporary insanity. But the bodies were exactly where I'd left them, torn and scattered. The blood had begun to congeal, dark and sticky in the beam of our lights. The stench was worse now, heavy in the cooling night air. "Holy shit," Mike whispered, his flashlight beam trained on what remained of a young man's torso. "What the hell did this?" Jim was already on the radio, calling in what we'd found, requesting additional backup and the county coroner. He was pale in the harsh light, his usual stoic demeanor cracking around the edges. "You said you didn't get a good look at what did this," he said to me, his voice carefully neutral. "But you saw something, right?" I nodded, my mouth dry. "Yeah, I saw something." "What was it, Flint?" "Bear? Mountain lion?" I looked around the clearing, half expecting to see that faceless figure watching us from the tree line. It wasn't any animal I've ever seen. Jim and Mike exchanged glances but didn't push further. More rangers arrived within the hour, along with county sheriff deputies and eventually the coroner. The clearing became a flurry of activity. Floodlights set up, evidence markers placed, photographs taken. I gave my statement repeatedly, sticking to the facts I thought they'd believe. I'd been on patrol. I'd found bones. I'd discovered the bodies. I'd seen something large, gray, moving fast. When pressed for details, I kept it vague. What was I supposed to say? That I'd seen an 8-foot-tall creature with no face? That it had made a sound that I felt in my chest? That it had somehow gotten ahead of me on the road as if it knew exactly where I was going? They'd have me committed. As the night wore on, theories began to circulate. A rogue bear, a particularly aggressive mountain lion, maybe even a human killer. Someone deranged who'd fashioned those bones into some kind of ritualistic display. I didn't argue. What was the point? It was easier to let them think I just lost it for a minute. And the joke's on me, I guess, because when they finally got around to it, they named the campsite in that area after me. Flint's Folly. Gotta love that ranger humor. The official report listed the cause of death as animal attack, species undetermined. The bones were sent to a lab for analysis, but were eventually deemed likely human, origin unknown, possibly archaeological in nature. The case remained open but inactive. Life in the Klamath National Forest returned to normal. Except for me. I couldn't shake what I'd seen. It haunted my dreams, stalked my waking thoughts. I found myself avoiding that section of the forest, making excuses to patrol elsewhere. The few times duty forced me back to that logging road, I felt watched, followed. The feeling of eyes, or whatever that thing used to see, boring into my back never left me. I started carrying a bigger knife, then a sidearm. I installed better locks on my cabin doors and windows. I drank more than I should have. Slept less than I needed to. My fellow rangers noticed the change in me, of course. They chalked it up to trauma from finding those bodies, suggested I talk to someone, get some help. But what could I say that wouldn't sound completely insane? Months passed. Seasons changed. Winter came and went, covering the forest in a blanket of snow that seemed to mute the memory of that day. Spring brought new growth, new life, a sense of renewal that almost, let me believe I could move past it. Then the reports started coming in. Hikers hearing strange sounds deep in the woods. Campers finding their sites disturbed overnight, not by bears or raccoons, but by something that left no tracks, took no food, just rearranged things. And bones, small animal bones at first, then larger ones appearing in neat little piles along trails and near campsites, and always in the same general area. Near what they now called Flint's Folly. Of course, no one believed the rest of my story. Sure, they believed the campers had been killed by something, but they wrote it off as a bear attack. A damn bear attack. The chief ranger, a gruff man named Harland who'd been working these woods since before I was born, called me into his office 6 months after the incident. He closed the door behind me, offered me a seat, and poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a pair of chipped mugs. "You're not sleeping," he said. It wasn't a question. I took the whiskey, swirled it around the mug. "I'm fine." Bullshit. Harlan took a sip of his drink, studying me over the rim. "You've lost weight. You jump at shadows. Hayes says you empty a clip at the firing range 3 times a week now, and you never used to carry it all." I said nothing. What could I say? "Listen, Flint. I've been around long enough to know when something's eating at a man. What you saw out there?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Whatever it was, it shook you. I get that. But you can't keep going like this." "I know what I saw," I said quietly. "It wasn't a bear." Harlan sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Maybe not. These woods are old, Flint. Older than any of us can really comprehend. The native folks around here, they've got stories. Things that live in the deep forest. Things that aren't quite natural." I looked up sharply. "You believe me?" "I didn't say that. But I believe you believe it, and that's enough for me to worry about you." He drained his whiskey. "Take some time off. Go visit your sister in Portland. Clear your head." I didn't take his advice. Couldn't. Something kept me there, tethered to those woods like I was waiting for. What, validation? Another sighting? Or maybe I was just waiting for that thing to finally come for me, to finish whatever it had started that day. A week later, we got a call about a missing hiker, a college student who'd gone off trail to take photographs. His girlfriend reported him missing when he didn't return to their campsite by nightfall. The search area included the old logging road, and despite the cold dread that filled me, I volunteered to join the search party. The forest felt different that day, watchful in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. The search team spread out, calling the hiker's name, listening for any response. I found myself drifting away from the others, drawn to a narrow deer path that led toward the ridge, overlooking the clearing where I'd first seen the creature. The sound reached me before I saw anything, that same low humming vibration that had preceded my first encounter. My hand went to my sidearm, unholstering it with practiced ease. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to rejoin the search party, to not face this thing alone again. But I kept moving forward, drawn by something I couldn't name. Fear, yes, but also a need to know, to understand, to face it. The ridge provided a clear view of the clearing below, and there it was, standing in the center just as I remembered. Tall, gray, faceless. But this time it wasn't alone. The missing hiker knelt before it, alive but unmoving, as if frozen in place. And around them both were bones, not just scattered as before, but arranged in an intricate pattern that spread outward from where they stood. The creature's head snapped up, turning toward me with unerring accuracy despite the distance and its lack of visible eyes. The humming intensified, vibrating through the ground beneath my feet, through my chest cavity, making my teeth ache. I raised my gun, though I doubted it would do any good. The creature regarded me for a long moment, then did something I hadn't expected. It backed away from the hiker, retreating to the edge of the clearing, watching, waiting, testing. The message was clear. This is between us now. I made my way down to the clearing, gun still trained on the creature, though it remained motionless. The hiker didn't respond to my calls. His eyes were open but unfocused, pupils dilated to tiny pinpricks despite the dim light. "Can you hear me?" I asked, keeping my voice low. My attention split between him and the creature. "We need to go now." No response. I reached for him, intending to help him up, to drag him away if necessary. But as my fingers brushed his shoulder, his head turned toward me with mechanical precision. And when he spoke, the voice wasn't his. It was a layered sound, like multiple voices speaking in unison. But underneath was that same humming vibration I'd come to dread. "You are the first to see," the hiker said, his mouth moving stiffly. "The first to know. There are more of us waking now." My blood ran cold. "What are you? Older than your kind?" "Sleeping beneath. Stirring now." The hiker's body convulsed slightly, his back arching at an unnatural angle. "This forest remembers us. Do you hear it whispering our names?" I did. In the rustle of leaves, in the creaking of branches, in the soft sighing of wind through the trees. Names without syllables. Concepts rather than sounds, pressing against my consciousness like dark water against a failing dam. "Why are you here?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. The hiker's lips stretched into a rictus grin. "To reclaim. To remember. To remake." Behind him the creature moved slightly, its featureless face rippling like the surface of disturbed water. For just a moment I thought I saw something forming there. The suggestion of eyes. A mouth, before it smoothed over again. "The barrier's thin," the hiker continued, his voice growing fainter, more distant. "Between your world and what lies beneath, we rise. We return." His eyes rolled back and he collapsed to the ground, unconscious but breathing. The creature remained at the edge of the clearing, watching us. I holstered my gun, a futile gesture against whatever this was, and hoisted the hiker over my shoulder. He was lighter than he should have been, as if something essential had been drained from him. As I turned to leave, the creature made that sound again, the vibration that seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my bones. But this time, impossibly, I understood it. A warning, a promise, a claim. This forest is ours. It has always been ours. You are merely guests tolerated for now. I carried the hiker back to the search party, making up a story about finding him unconscious, possibly from dehydration. He recovered physically but never remembered what happened to him in those woods. Or if he did, he chose not to speak of it. As for me, I stayed on as a ranger for another year before finally taking Harlan's advice and leaving the Klamath. But I still dream of that faceless creature, of bones arranged in patterns that almost made sense, of voices speaking through borrowed mouths. And sometimes when the wind blows just right, I swear I can still hear that humming vibration, calling me back to the woods, back to the truth I discovered, the truth no one believed, back to Flint's Folly, where something ancient watches and waits for the day when the barriers between worlds grow thin enough for it to fully return. Nature doesn't care about your plans. It doesn't care if you're having a bad day. It just happens, and you deal with it. I started my shift like any other day, walking into the bustling office of the Missing Persons Unit in downtown Detroit. I was greeted by the usual chaos, ringing phones, frantic relatives, and the hum of police radios. My name is Virgil Yates, and I've been with the MPU for over a decade. This job has hardened me in ways I never thought possible. I've seen the darkest corners of humanity, but nothing prepared me for what I was about to encounter. I grabbed a coffee from the break room, nodding to my colleagues as I passed by. Today, my partner Clara Mercado and I were assigned a case that had been open for 3 weeks. It involved the disappearance of a teenager named Jimmy Calloway. His parents reported him missing after he didn't return from a camping trip in the nearby Pine Barrens. There's something off about this case. No signs of struggle, no witnesses. It's like he vanished into thin air, Clara said, sliding the file across my desk. I nodded, sipping my coffee. Let's head out to the Barrens and see if we can find anything the locals missed. We packed up our gear and drove out to the Pine Barrens, an eerie, sprawling forest that had an unsettling reputation among locals. The March air was crisp, carrying the scent of melting snow and wet earth. Dark clouds hung low over the tree line, promising rain. You know what they say about these woods, Clara said, breaking the silence as we drove. Don't start with that folklore crap, I replied, though a chill ran up my spine. The Pine Barrens had always been surrounded by strange stories. Hikers going missing, strange sounds in the night, shadows that moved against the wind. We parked at the ranger station and interviewed the staff first. A lanky park ranger named Thompson fidgeted as he spoke. Jimmy was a regular out here. Good kid, knew the trails. That's what makes it strange. He wouldn't just get lost. Any predators in these woods that could pose a threat? I asked. Thompson's eyes darted away. Nothing that would take down a person. Not officially, anyway. What does that mean? Clara pressed. Nothing, just folks talk is all. He wouldn't elaborate further. We hiked to Jimmy's last known location, a small clearing about 3 miles from the nearest trail. The remains of his campsite were still there. A collapsed tent scattered supplies. The local police had processed the scene weeks ago, but something compelled me to look closer. The wind picked up, whistling through the trees with an almost human quality. I crouched near the tent, running my fingers over deep tears in the fabric. Clara, look at this. I pointed to the rips. Whatever did this was strong. She knelt beside me, examining the tears. Bear, maybe? I shook my head. No bear prints around the site. And look at the pattern. 5 parallel slashes evenly spaced. The sky darkened as we continued our search. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder. The drops drummed against the fallen leaves, creating a disorienting rhythm that seemed to pulse through the forest. We should head back, Clara suggested, but something caught my eye. A flash of color against the brown forest floor. I moved toward it, pushing aside wet branches. It was a shred of fabric, the same blue as the jacket Jimmy had been wearing in his last photo. And beneath it, partially obscured by leaves, was a dark stain that I recognized all too well. Blood, I said, my voice nearly drowned out by the rain. Clara bagged the evidence while I scanned the surroundings. That's when I noticed them. Indentations in the soft earth leading away from the campsite. Not quite footprints, but something else. Something that made my stomach knot. Tracks? Clara asked, following my gaze. I nodded, unable to speak. They were unlike anything I'd seen before. Elongated impressions with what appeared to be claw marks at the tips. Too large for any animal native to these woods, too strange for any human. As we followed the trail, the trees grew denser, blocking what little daylight remained. The rain eased to a drizzle, but the forest floor had become treacherous with mud and hidden roots. The tracks led us deeper into the barrens, to parts unmarked on any trail map. Here the trees stood unnaturally close together, their branches intertwining above like gnarled fingers. The air felt heavy, pressing against my lungs with each breath. We're losing light, Clara warned, checking her watch. Another 30 minutes, then we turn back. I agreed, though something pulled me forward, a growing certainty that we were close to answers. The tracks continued over a ridge and down into a shallow ravine where they abruptly stopped. Where did they go? Clara murmured, sweeping her flashlight across the ground. I moved forward cautiously, the beam of my own light dancing over the forest floor. That's when I saw it. A dark opening in the hillside, partially hidden by overgrown brush. A cave entrance, so well concealed that we would have missed it entirely if not for the disturbed vegetation at its mouth. "Call it in," I told Clara, my hand moving instinctively to my service weapon. "Tell them we found something and request backup." As she made the call, I approached the cave, an overwhelming sense of dread building with each step. From deep within the darkness came a sound, so faint I thought I'd imagined it, a soft rhythmic scraping like claws against stone. Night was falling fast now, the forest dissolving into shadow around us. We should leave, return in the morning with a proper team. That would be the sensible thing to do. Instead, I clicked on my flashlight and stepped toward the cave entrance, drawn by something I couldn't explain, a need to know what waited in the darkness, what had taken Jimmy Calloway, and perhaps others before him. "Backup's on the way," Clara said, joining me. "But with this weather, it'll be at least an hour." I nodded, my eyes fixed on the black void before us. "Then I guess we're on our own." The cave mouth yawned before us, a wound in the earth-bleeding darkness. Our flashlight beams cut weak paths through the gloom, revealing slick stone walls that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The air inside was cold and heavy with a musty odor that clung to the back of my throat. "Stay close," I whispered to Clara, though I wasn't sure why I lowered my voice. Something about this place demanded silence, as if speaking too loudly might wake something better left dormant. We moved carefully, our footsteps echoing despite our caution. The passage sloped downward, leading us deeper under the pine barrens. The further we went, the more the temperature dropped until our breath hung visibly in the beam of our flashlights. "Virgil?" Clara called softly, her light fixed on the wall beside her. "Look at this." I moved closer, examining what had caught her attention. Scratched into the stone were strange markings, not random gouges but deliberate patterns. Some resembled stick figures, others spirals and jagged lines that might have been primitive letters. "Native American?" I suggested, though they didn't match any indigenous art I'd seen before. Clara shook her head. "These don't look that old." She was right. The cuts were fresh, the exposed stone lighter than the surrounding surface. Someone, or something, had made these recently. We continued downward, the passage narrowing until we had to proceed single file. The markings became more frequent, more frantic in their execution. Interspersed among them were dark smears that I desperately hoped weren't blood. The tunnel suddenly opened into a larger chamber. We stood at the threshold, sweeping our lights across the space. The floor was littered with debris, animal bones, torn clothing, rusted metal objects too corroded to identify. My light caught something reflective near the center of the chamber. I approached cautiously, Clara covering me from behind. It was a watch, its face cracked but still functional. The hands had stopped at 3:17, and the date window showed March 1st, the day Jimmy Calloway disappeared. "It's his," Clara confirmed, checking the case file on her phone. "His parents reported he was wearing his grandfather's watch." I bagged the evidence, trying to ignore the implications. If Jimmy's watch was here, where was Jimmy? A strange acoustical property of the chamber became apparent as we searched. Sounds seemed to travel oddly, echoing from unexpected directions. More than once I spun around, certain I'd heard something moving behind me only to find nothing there. "There's another passage," Clara said, pointing to a narrow opening on the far side of the chamber. "Should we check it out?" Before I could answer, a low sound vibrated through the cave. Not quite a growl, not quite a moan, but something in between that raised the hair on my arms. It came from the passage ahead, a sound no human throat could make. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, drawing my weapon. Clara nodded, her own gun already in hand. Her face, half illuminated by her flashlight, showed the same tension I felt. "Could be an animal," she suggested, though her tone betrayed her doubt. "Bear seeking shelter? In a cave this deep? With these markings?" I shook my head. "No bear did this." The sound came again, louder this time, followed by a shuffling noise. Something was moving in there, drawing closer. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat, to wait for backup, but the thought of Jimmy Calloway, and possibly others, kept me rooted in place. If there was even a chance of finding him alive. "Stay behind me," I said, moving toward the passage with my gun trained on the darkness ahead. The tunnel beyond was tighter than the first, forcing us to crouch as we advanced. The walls here were covered with the strange markings, so densely packed they overlapped. My flashlight beam trembled slightly, not from fear, I told myself, but from the cold. The passage twisted sharply, then opened into another chamber. Smaller than the first, but with a ceiling that rose beyond the reach of our lights. The floor here was different, not stone, but earth, packed hard and covered with more bones than I could count. Most appeared to be animal remains, but some were unmistakably human. Ribs, femurs, a partial skull with a fracture that spoke of violent death. Jesus Christ, Clara breathed. Among the bones were personal effects. A woman's shoe, a child's backpack, tattered clothing, a broken pair of glasses. How many people had disappeared in these woods over the years? How many had ended up here in this charnel house beneath the pines? Something glinted among the remains. A silver pendant on a broken chain. I recognized it immediately from the case file photos. It was Jimmy's, a graduation gift from his parents. "He's here," I said, my voice hollow in the cavernous space, or at least he was. As I bent to retrieve the pendant, I noticed something else. Fresh tracks in the dirt floor, leading to another passage at the far end of the chamber. The same strange impressions we'd followed in the forest, but clearer here in the protected environment of the cave. "Look at this, Virgil," Clara said, crouching down. "These tracks. They're not human." I kneeled beside her, examining the prints. They were large, clawed, and deeply embedded in the soil. A chill ran down my spine. "What the hell made these?" I muttered, trying to keep my voice steady. "No idea, but whatever it is, it's not friendly," Clara replied, her eyes scanning the darkness. We followed the tracks across the chamber toward the next passage. The bones crunched beneath our feet, a macabre carpet that recorded our progress with each step. The air changed as we approached the passage, became thicker, damper, carrying a stomach-turning stench of decay and something else, something musky and animal. The sound came again, closer now, a deep rumbling growl that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. "Stay close," I whispered, drawing my flashlight and pistol. Clara did the same, and we cautiously entered the passage. The tunnel sloped sharply downward, the walls growing slick with moisture. The air grew warmer, heavy with humidity that made breathing difficult. Our lights caught movement ahead, something quick and furtive, withdrawing deeper into the cave. "Did you see that?" Clara hissed. I nodded, my mouth too dry to speak. Whatever it was, it moved upright, but not like a human. Its motion was jerky, unnatural, as if its joints bent in ways they shouldn't. The passage opened into a final chamber, larger than the others, and dominated by a pool of dark water that filled most of the floor. Steam rose from the surface, suggesting it was fed by an underground hot spring. The ceiling arched high above, lost in darkness despite our lights. Around the pool's edge, more bones were carefully arranged in patterns that mirrored the markings on the walls. In the center, partially submerged in the water, was a large flat stone that resembled an altar. "What is this place?" Clara whispered, her voice tight with fear. Before I could answer, a low, guttural sound echoed through the chamber, freezing us in place. From the shadows beyond the pool emerged a creature unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was tall, covered in matted fur with long, twisted limbs and eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. "Run!" I shouted, firing a shot at the creature. The bullet barely slowed it down as it lunged at us. Clara and I sprinted towards the passage, the creature hot on our heels. We burst back through the bone chamber, scrambling over the grisly remains in our desperate flight. The creature moved with unnatural speed, its growls echoing off the stone walls. In the narrow confines of the passage, our advantage of distance quickly disappeared. "Split up at the junction," I shouted to Clara as we approached the first chamber. "I'll draw it off." She hesitated, torn between following orders and abandoning me. "Go," I insisted. "Get back up." We reached the main chamber and separated, Clara heading for the exit tunnel while I veered toward a smaller passage we hadn't explored. The creature paused momentarily as if deciding which prey to pursue, then came after me. I heard Clara's footsteps fading as she escaped. At least one of us would make it out. The passage I'd chosen narrowed quickly, forcing me to slow down. My flashlight beam bounced wildly off the walls as I ran, creating disorienting patterns of light and shadow. Behind me, the creature's breathing grew louder, its footfalls heavier. The tunnel ended abruptly in a small chamber with no exit. I turned my back against the wall, gun raised. The creature filled the passage, blocking any chance of escape. In the confined space, I could finally see it clearly. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, its body covered in dark, matted fur that hung in clumps from its gaunt frame. Its face was a nightmare, Vaguely humanoid, but with a protruding jaw filled with jagged teeth and eyes that reflected my flashlight beam with an eerie yellow glow. Its limbs were too long, too thin, jointed in places where no joints should be. I fired twice, the gunshots deafening in the confined space. The creature flinched but didn't fall. It advanced slowly now, as if savoring my fear. I emptied my clip into it, each impact causing it to shudder but not deterring its approach. When my gun clicked empty, the creature lunged. Its claws raked across my chest, shredding my jacket and drawing blood. The pain was immediate and intense. I swung my flashlight, connecting with its head, but the blow seemed to barely register. Long fingers wrapped around my throat, cutting off my air. As darkness crept into the edges of my vision, the creature's face came close to mine. Its breath was hot and fetid, carrying the stench of rot. It made a sound, not a growl this time, but something that chilled me more. A series of clicks and whistles that almost resembled speech. Then darkness took me completely. I awoke to pain and cold. I was lying on hard stone, my clothes damp with blood and cave moisture. My chest burned where the creature's claws had torn my flesh. My head throbbed, and when I tried to move, vertigo swept over me in nauseating waves. Forcing my eyes open, I found myself in a pit about 15 feet deep with smooth stone walls that offered no handholds. Above, a circular opening revealed a larger cave chamber dimly lit by what appeared to be phosphorescent fungi growing on the walls. Other pits dotted the chamber floor, most covered with crude grates fashioned from branches and bones. From one nearby, I heard soft whimpering. "Hello?" I called, my voice raw and painful. "Who's there?" The whimpering stopped, replaced by a scared whisper. "Help me, please." The voice was young, a teenager maybe. "Jimmy," I asked. "Jimmy Calloway?" Silence then. "How do you know my name?" Relief flooded through me. The kid was alive against all odds. "I'm Detective Virgil Yates, Detroit MPU. Your parents reported you missing. We've been looking for you." Jimmy's laugh was brittle, edged with hysteria. 3 weeks. It's been keeping me here for 3 weeks. Are you hurt? I asked, struggling to sit up despite the pain. My leg's broken. It broke it the first day when I tried to run. His voice dropped lower. There were others when I first got here. They're gone now. I didn't ask what happened to them. The bone chamber had told that story clearly enough. My partner got away, I said, trying to sound confident. Help will come. It won't matter, Jimmy replied flatly. It knows these caves better than anyone. Your partner won't find her way back, and if she does, it'll be waiting. I checked my pockets, hoping for something useful. My gun was gone, as were my phone and flashlight. All I had was a pen, a small notebook, and my badge. How long does it leave us alone? I asked Jimmy. It comes at night. Take someone away. They never come back. I looked up at the chamber ceiling, trying to gauge the time. Without my watch or phone, it was impossible to tell, but the fungi seemed to be glowing more brightly, suggesting darkness had fallen outside. Jimmy, I need you to focus. What else can you tell me about this thing? Any weaknesses you've noticed? The silence stretched so long I thought he might have passed out. Finally he spoke, his voice barely audible. It's smart. Smarter than an animal. It collects things. Watches jewelry, phones. Arranges them in patterns. And sometimes it speaks. Speaks? English. No, something else. But it understands us. When I begged it seemed to enjoy it. My blood ran cold at the implications. Whatever this creature was, it wasn't simply a predator. It was something worse. Something that took pleasure in fear. Hours passed in that pit. I tried repeatedly to find a way out, but the walls were too smooth. The drop too far for my injured body to overcome. Jimmy fell silent eventually, though occasional moans told me he was still alive. The fungal light dimmed gradually, plunging the chamber into near total darkness. That's when I heard it. The shuffling steps, the clicking sounds that might have been language. The creature had returned. I pressed myself against the wall of the pit, hoping to remain unnoticed, but the creature came straight to my prison. Its silhouette blocked the minimal light from above as it peered down at me. Then, with surprising agility, it descended into the pit, landing lightly despite its size. Up close, in the darkness, its eyes glowed with an internal light. It reached for me with those long, twisted fingers, and I struggled despite knowing it was futile. It lifted me effortlessly, carrying me out of the pit and across the chamber. Why are you doing this? I demanded, my voice echoing off the walls. The creature tilted its head as if contemplating my question. Then with a swift motion it lunged at me again. I braced for the impact, but instead of attacking, the creature stopped short, sniffing the air. It turned and fled into the darkness, leaving me bewildered and injured on the chamber floor. Something had spooked it. Some sound or smell I couldn't detect. Whatever the reason, I wasn't going to waste the opportunity. I stumbled to Jimmy's pit, finding it covered with a grate of branches tied together with what looked like human hair. "Jimmy," I whispered, peering through the grate. "It's gone. I'm going to get you out." The boy looked up at me, his face gaunt and dirty in the dim light. "It'll come back. It always comes back." "Not before we're gone," I insisted, working to untie the grate. Once I had it open, I lowered myself carefully into Jimmy's pit. His leg was badly broken, the bone visible through torn flesh. He wouldn't be able to walk, which meant I'd have to carry him. "This is going to hurt," I warned him. "But I need you to stay quiet, okay?" He nodded, biting his lip as I lifted him. His body was light, too light, evidence of weeks of starvation. I climbed out awkwardly, using one arm to brace against the wall while holding him with the other. "Which way?" I asked, looking around the chamber. Multiple passages led off in different directions. Jimmy pointed weakly toward a tunnel slightly narrower than the others. "It never takes anyone that way," he said. "I think it leads out." I carried Jimmy through the tunnel, every step sending jolts of pain through my own injuries. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes widening enough for us to move comfortably, other times narrowing until I had to turn sideways to squeeze through with my burden. After what felt like hours, I detected a change in the air, a freshness that suggested we were approaching the surface. Jimmy had fallen unconscious, his breathing shallow against my chest. Finally, the tunnel sloped upward, and I glimpsed starlight through a narrow opening ahead. We emerged into the forest, the night air cool and sweet after the stench of the caves. I had no idea where we were in relation to the original entrance, but at that moment I didn't care. We were out. I stumbled forward, putting as much distance between us and the cave as possible. My strength was failing rapidly, blood loss and exhaustion taking their toll. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, I heard voices in the distance and saw the bobbing lights of flashlights through the trees. "Here," I tried to shout, but my voice emerged as little more than a croak. I summoned my last reserves of energy. "We're over here." The lights turned in our direction, and moments later, Clara's face appeared in the beam of a powerful flashlight. "Virgil, my God." As the search team reached us, I finally allowed myself to collapse. Jimmy still clutched protectively in my arms. The last thing I heard before unconsciousness claimed me was Clara's voice, urgent and frightened, calling for medical evacuation. I awoke in a hospital room, the harsh fluorescent lights making me wince. An IV dripped fluids into my arm, and tight bandages restricted movement across my chest. My throat felt raw, and every breath brought a stab of pain from my ribs. Clara sat in a chair beside the bed, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she hadn't slept much. When she noticed I was awake, relief washed over her face. "Welcome back," she said, her voice hoarse with emotion. "You had us worried." "Jimmy?" I asked, the name barely audible through my damaged throat. "Alive. Critical but stable. They airlifted him to Detroit General." She leaned closer. "Virgil, what happened in there?" "What was that thing?" The memory of the creature's face flashed in my mind. Those glowing eyes, that twisted mouth. I closed my eyes, trying to block it out. "I don't know," I admitted. "Something not right." Clara nodded, not pressing for more. "The cave entrance collapsed sometime after the rescue team extracted you. They're saying it was unstable to begin with. All the recent rains weakened the structure." I knew better. The creature had sealed its lair, protecting itself from intrusion. The thought that it was still out there, still hunting, sent a chill through me despite the warm hospital room. A doctor came in, followed by two men in suits that screamed federal law enforcement. I recognized one of them, Agent Dawson from the FBI's Violent Crimes Unit. "Detective Yates." Dawson nodded curtly. "Glad to see you're recovering. We have some questions about what you encountered in the Pine Barrens." The doctor objected, citing my condition, but I waved him off. "It's fine. I want to talk." For the next hour, I recounted everything. The strange tracks, the cave chambers, the bones, and the creature itself. I described its appearance, its behavior, the way it seemed to understand human fear and exploit it. The FBI agents took notes but revealed nothing in their expressions. "And you believe this entity is responsible for multiple disappearances?" Agent Dawson asked when I finished. The cave was a graveyard, I said flatly. Decades worth of victims based on the items I saw. Dawson exchanged a glance with his partner. We'll need to verify this, of course. Unfortunately, with the cave collapsed, physical evidence will be difficult to recover. Jimmy Calloway is your evidence, I insisted. Talk to him. He was there for 3 weeks. We intend to, Dawson assured me, once his doctors clear him for questioning. After they left, Clara remained, her face troubled. They don't believe you, she said. Not really. Would you? If you hadn't seen it yourself. She looked away. I only caught a glimpse, Virgil. In the dark, under stress. It could have been a man. Some crazy hermit living in the caves. It wasn't human, I said firmly. You know that. Clara didn't argue, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She wanted it to be explainable, categorizable, something that could be arrested and put on trial, something that wouldn't haunt her dreams. I was released from the hospital 3 days later with strict instructions to rest and recover. Instead, I drove straight to Detroit General to see Jimmy Calloway. His parents were there, hollow-eyed with exhaustion but radiating relief. They thanked me repeatedly, the mother clutching my hand so tightly it hurt. Jimmy was awake but heavily medicated. His leg was suspended in traction, and feeding tubes ran into his emaciated body. When his parents stepped out to get coffee, I approached his bedside. Do you remember me? I asked softly. His eyes focused on my face and recognition dawned. The detective. You got me out, I nodded. I need to ask you something, Jimmy. Something important. What do you remember about the creature? Fear flashed across his face. They don't believe me, he whispered. The doctors, the other police, they think I'm confused from dehydration and trauma. I believe you, I assured him. I saw it too. Tears welled in his eyes. It talked to me sometimes. Not in words, but I could understand it. It said it's been in those woods for centuries, that people used to leave offerings for it. Sacrifices. My blood ran cold. What kind of sacrifices? Animals at first, then children. His voice dropped to a barely audible whisper. It said people have forgotten the old ways, but it remembers. It always remembers. I left the hospital with Jimmy's words echoing in my head. At home, I pulled out my laptop and began researching the history of the Pine Barrens area. What I found disturbed me more than I expected. The region had an unusually high number of disappearances dating back to colonial times. Native American legends spoke of a forest spirit that demanded tribute. Early settlers had tales of a pine walker that stole children who ventured too far into the woods. In the 1880s, a local pastor had led a campaign to cleanse the forest of evil, claiming demonic worship was taking place in caves beneath the pines. His crusade ended when he and 5 followers disappeared during a forest expedition. More recently, a 1970s anthropological study of the area noted unusual carvings found on trees and rocks, symbols that looked disturbingly similar to the markings I'd seen in the cave. I printed everything, creating a case file of my own. Clara called several times, but I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to talk, not until I understood what we were dealing with. A week into my medical leave, Captain Rodriguez summoned me to his office. I found Clara already there, along with Agent Dawson and a woman in a Parks Department uniform. Virgil, Rodriguez began, his tone cautious, we need to discuss your report on the Calloway case. What about it? I asked, though I already knew. It's problematic, Dawson interjected. Physically impossible in many respects. I reported what I saw, I insisted. The Parks Department woman, Dr. Morris, according to her nameplate, cleared her throat. Detective Yates, we've conducted a thorough survey of the area where you and Detective Mercado reported finding a cave entrance. There's no evidence of any cave system in that location. The geological composition doesn't support it. It collapsed, I reminded them. Clara saw that. I saw a small sinkhole, Clara corrected gently. Maybe 20 feet deep. Not the extensive network you described. They were rewriting reality before my eyes, molding the facts to fit a narrative they could accept. A deranged mountain man, perhaps. Or even a bear driven to unusual behavior by habitat encroachment. Anything but the truth. The official report will cite Jimmy Calloway's abduction by person or persons unknown, Rodriguez explained, with his rescue by MPU detectives after an extended search effort. And the other victims? I demanded. The bones? What bones, Detective? Dawson asked coolly. No human remains were recovered from the site. I looked at Clara, seeking support, but her eyes dropped away from mine. She'd chosen the comfortable lie over the uncomfortable truth. "Take another week," Rodriguez said, his tone softening. "Rest, see the department therapist. This case has clearly affected you deeply." I left without another word, rage and frustration building with each step. In the parking lot, Clara caught up to me. "Virgil, wait, please," I turned to face her. "You saw it too, Clara. You know what happened." She bit her lip. "I saw something in poor light during a high-stress situation. My mind could have filled in details that weren't there. And Jimmy? Is he making it up too?" He was half-starved and dehydrated. Hallucinations are common in those conditions. She reached for my arm. "Please, Virgil, let this go. For your own sake," I pulled away. "I can't, it's still out there, Clara. Still hunting." As I drove home, rain began to fall, drumming on the roof of my car with the same rhythm I'd heard in the forest. I knew what I had to do. Official channels were closed to me now. But that wouldn't stop my investigation. I would find evidence they couldn't ignore, proof of what lurked in the darkness beneath the pines. The creature had called those woods home for centuries. It had adapted, learned, survived. But so had I. And unlike its previous hunters, I knew exactly what I was looking for. 6 months passed. Summer came and went. Leaves turned golden, then brown, then fell to carpet the forest floor. My physical wounds healed, leaving only scars. 3 parallel lines across my chest that tingled sometimes in the night, as if remembering the touch that created them. I returned to work at the MPU, handling routine cases with mechanical efficiency. My colleagues tiptoed around me, conversations dying when I entered rooms. Clara requested a transfer to another unit. Captain Rodriguez watched me with worried eyes but said nothing as long as I did my job. On my own time, I continued my research. I tracked down every disappearance in the Pine Barrens going back 50 years, mapping them, looking for patterns. I interviewed survivors, families, witnesses, anyone who had encountered something they couldn't explain in those woods. Most doors closed in my face. A few opened, revealing stories that matched pieces of my experience. A hunter who glimpsed something walking upright that wasn't a man. A hiker who heard strange speech-like sounds echoing through the trees at dusk. A woman whose grandfather spoke of caves where the old ones still lived, waiting for tribute. Jimmy Calloway refused to see me. His parents had moved the family to Arizona, as far from forests as they could get. I didn't blame them. Some nights I considered similar escape, but something held me here, a need to finish what had started in those caves. As October ended and the first frost settled on Detroit, I made my decision. The creature had hibernated during summer. Disappearances had all but stopped during the hottest months, according to my research. But as temperatures dropped, reports of strange sounds and missing hikers began to circulate again. I took a week's vacation, packed my car with supplies, and drove to the Pine Barrens one last time. The ranger station was closed for the season, the parking lot empty. Perfect. No one to question my presence or report my activities. I hiked into the forest as afternoon light filtered through bare branches. The woods were quiet. Most animals already bedded down for winter or migrated south. My breath clouded in the cold air as I followed the trail I'd marked on my map. Not toward the collapsed cave entrance, but to another location entirely. My research had revealed a pattern to the disappearances. They radiated outward from a central point like ripples in a pond. At that center point, local legends placed an unusual rock formation called the Devil's Pulpit, a natural platform overlooking a steep ravine. I reached it as sunset painted the western sky in shades of fire. The formation lived up to its name, a flat-topped boulder perched at the edge of a cliff, with smaller stones arranged before it like supplicants. From here, the entire valley was visible, including the spot where Jimmy had set up his ill-fated camp months earlier. I made my own camp nearby, not bothering with a tent. Instead, I cleared a space, built a small fire, and waited. Night descended, bringing with it a bone-deep chill that no fire could fully dispel. Stars appeared overhead, brilliant in the clear November sky. Hours passed. The fire burned down to embers. I fed it occasionally but kept it small. I wanted to be seen but not from a distance. This needed to be intimate, personal. Shortly after midnight, I heard the first signs of approach. Not footsteps, but a subtle shifting of the forest's ambient sounds. Birds that should have been silent at this hour suddenly called warning notes. Small animals rustled through underbrush, fleeing from something moving their way. I didn't reach for my gun, though it rested reassuringly against my side. Instead, I added another log to the fire and spoke to the darkness. I know you're there. I know you can understand me. Silence answered, but it was an attentive silence, a listening one. You remember me, I continued. From the cave. You marked me. I pulled down my collar, revealing the scars on my chest. I'm marked as yours, aren't I? That's your way. A sound came from the trees to my left, that same clicking, whistling vocalization I'd heard in the cave. I turned toward it slowly, showing no fear. The people who lived here long ago, they knew about you. They left you offerings to keep you satisfied. I gestured to a small bundle beside me. I brought you something. From the shadows beyond the firelight, it emerged. In the open air, under starlight, it seemed both more and less than my memory of it. More because I could see details I'd missed in the cave, the patterns in its matted fur, the almost delicate structure of its elongated fingers. Less because here in the vastness of the forest, it seemed less monstrous, more natural, a predator in its element. Its eyes reflected the firelight as it approached cautiously, had tilted in that curious way I remembered. It stopped at the edge of the light, neither retreating nor advancing further. I unwrapped the bundle slowly, revealing a stack of photographs, every missing person from these woods I'd been able to document going back decades. I placed them on the ground between us. I know what you are now, I said quietly. Not a monster, not a myth, just very, very old and very patient. The creature made that sound again, then extended a hand toward the photos. I didn't move as it picked one up, examined it, then selected another. It arranged them in a pattern that echoed the markings from the cave walls. You remember them all, don't you? Every one you've taken. It looked up at me, and for the first time I saw clear intelligence in those yellow eyes. Not animal cunning, but something approaching human understanding. It nodded, a gesture so unexpectedly civilized that it sent a chill through me despite the fire's warmth. The world's forgotten you, I continued. Forgotten the bargain our ancestors made. But I remember now, and I'm going to make sure others remember too. From my pocket, I drew a small digital recorder and placed it on the ground, its red light blinking in the darkness. Tell me your story, I said. In whatever way you can. For a long moment, the creature stared at the recorder, then at me. Then it began to vocalize. Not random animal sounds, but structured, patterned speech. I couldn't understand the words, but the cadence was unmistakably language. It spoke for several minutes, gesturing occasionally toward the photos, toward the cliff, toward the stars. When it finished, it rose to its full height and backed away from the fire. I stood as well, wincing as my scarred chest pulled with the movement. I'll be back, I promised, every year at this same time. I'll bring you news of the world beyond your forest. In return, you stay in these woods. You take only what you need to survive. No more children. No more innocents like Jimmy Calloway. The creature made a sound, not speech this time, but something between a growl and a sigh. Then it turned and melted into the darkness, moving with that strange, fluid grace I remembered from the cave. I extinguished my fire and hiked back to my car under starlight, the recorder clutched tightly in my hand. I had no illusion that anyone would believe me, even with this evidence. The recording would be dismissed as a hoax, the story as delusion. But I knew the truth now. The Pine Barrens had their guardian, their predator, their god. It had been there before us and would remain long after. Not a monster from folklore, but something older. Something that had walked alongside humanity's ancestors and learned our ways even as we forgot its existence. As I drove back toward Detroit, dawn breaking over the eastern horizon, I found myself less afraid than I expected. Understanding, even incomplete, had replaced terror. I had looked into the abyss and it had looked back, not with mindless hunger but with ancient recognition. The missing persons cases would continue to cross my desk. Some I would solve through conventional means. Others would lead me back to the woods, to the bargain I had struck with something that should not exist but did. My phone rang as I reached the city limits. Captain Rodriguez calling me in on a new case. Life returning to normal, or what passed for normal now, I answered, slipping back into my role as Detective Virgil Yates, MPU. But part of me remained in those woods, marked and changed. Like the Pine Barrens themselves, I now harbored secrets beneath my surface, dark and ancient and hungry. And when November came again, I would return to the Devil's Pulpit with my recorder and my photographs. I would feed the fire and wait for those yellow eyes to emerge from the darkness. Some bargains once made can never be broken. I never wanted to be a park ranger in the first place. The irony wasn't lost on me as I stared at the assignment notice on my desk, the Forest Service letterhead gleaming under the fluorescent lights of the station. Blackwood National Forest. The name alone carried a certain weight, whispered among rangers with a mix of reverence and unease. "Congratulations," Park Superintendent Morris said, leaning against the doorframe of my cramped office. "Most rangers wait years for a post like this." I looked up from the notice, searching his weathered face for any hint of sarcasm. There was none. Just the stolid expression of a man who'd spent 30 years managing the unmanageable, the vast wilderness preserves of the American West. "Why me?" I asked, gesturing to the paper. "I've barely been with the service for 2 years. Morris shrugged, his ranger uniform creasing at the shoulders. "Budget cuts, retirements, and frankly, you've got the right temperament for Blackwood." "Meaning?" "You don't scare easy. And you don't talk much." He straightened up. "Pack your gear. You head out tomorrow." After he left, I sat alone in the silence, contemplating the bizarre turn my life had taken. 3 years ago, I'd been teaching environmental science at a community college, buried in student papers and bureaucracy. Now I was being sent to one of the most remote ranger stations in the country, nestled deep in the Blackwood National Forest, a place that had more folklore attached to it than actual visitors. That night, I packed efficiently the way my father had taught me. Everything had its place: first aid kit, emergency radio, compass, maps, field guides. I hesitated over my personal journal, a habit I'd kept since childhood, before tucking it into my backpack. If nothing else, perhaps the isolation would give me time to write. The drive to Blackwood took nearly 6 hours, the landscape gradually transforming from suburban sprawl to rolling farmland, then to foothills and finally to dense forest. The road narrowed, the pavement giving way to gravel, then to dirt. Cell service vanished 3 hours in. The ranger station appeared suddenly around a bend, a rustic wooden structure with a sloped roof and wide porch surrounded by towering pines. It looked both welcoming and somehow forgotten, like a cabin in a fairy tale where time moved differently. A man stood on the porch, tall and lean, with a gray beard and ranger hat. He raised a hand in greeting as I pulled up. "You must be the new ranger," he called out. "I'm Jim Hollis." "Nice to meet you," I replied, climbing out of my vehicle. I know who you are," he interrupted, not unkindly. "We don't get many new faces up here." He gestured to the cabin. "Come on in. I'll brief you before I head out." My retirement's been a long time coming. Inside, the station was neat but dated. A large topographical map of Blackwood dominated one wall, dotted with colored pins. A radio system occupied a corner desk alongside a computer that looked at least a decade old. "Dial-up internet," Jim explained, following my gaze. "Works about half the time. Radio's more reliable." He spent the next hour walking me through protocols, patrol routes, and the peculiarities of managing Blackwood. The forest covered nearly 400,000 acres, with only 3 maintained hiking trails and 1 campground. Most of it was designated wilderness, no vehicles, no development. "Not many visitors this time of year," Jim said, tracing a finger along one of the trails on the map. "Mostly serious hikers and the occasional researcher. The university sends biology students sometimes." I nodded, taking mental notes. "And any particular areas I should focus on?" Something flickered across his face, hesitation perhaps. "The North Ridge gets the most traffic and—" He paused. "Stay away from Whispering Creek, especially at night." I raised an eyebrow. "Problem area?" "You could say that." Jim rubbed his beard. "Look, every forest has its stories. Blackwood has more than most. You'll hear them eventually." "I'm not much for ghost stories," I said. Jim's laugh held no humor. "Neither was I until I came here." He glanced at his watch. "I need to hit the road if I want to make it down the mountain before dark." "The cabin's yours. Keys are in the top drawer. All the logbooks are up to date." Before leaving, he paused at the door. "One more thing. If you hear anything strange at night, voices, singing, anything like that, stay inside. Note it in the log, but don't investigate alone." With that cryptic warning, he was gone, leaving me alone in the sudden silence of the station. Through the window, I watched his truck disappear down the dirt road, dust rising in its wake. That night, as darkness settled over the forest, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, listening to the symphony of insects and the distant call of an owl. The stars emerged in breathtaking clarity, unchallenged by any artificial light for miles. I thought about Jim's warning and the stories that might have inspired it. Every wilderness had its legends, its cautionary tales designed to keep people alert and respectful. As a scientist by training, I'd always viewed such stories as cultural artifacts interesting, but ultimately explainable through rational means. Little did I know that Blackwood would soon challenge everything I thought I understood about the natural world, and my place within it. My first week at Blackwood passed uneventfully. I patrolled the main trails, checked on the campground, empty save for one hardy couple from Montana, and familiarized myself with the topography. I maintained the logbook meticulously, noting weather conditions, wildlife sightings, and the occasional maintenance issue. Nothing unusual occurred, though I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched whenever I ventured into certain areas of the forest. I attributed this to normal adjustment to isolation, the human mind seeking patterns and presence where none existed. On the 8th day, that changed. I was patrolling the eastern boundary, where Blackwood adjoined private land. The trail there was overgrown, suggesting infrequent use. Around midday, I stopped by a small stream to eat lunch and check my maps. That's when I noticed the footprints. They crossed the stream about 20 yards upstream, large impressions in the soft mud of the bank. At first glance, they resembled bear tracks, but something was off about the shape and the stride length. I approached cautiously, camera in hand. The prints were roughly 15 inches long with what appeared to be 5 digits, but the weight distribution was all wrong for a bear. They showed clear heel and arch marks, more human than animal, yet far too large for any person. Most strangely, they seemed to appear from nowhere on one bank and continue into the dense underbrush on the other side. I photographed them from multiple angles, then placed my own boot beside one for scale. My size 11 was dwarfed by the mysterious impression. I made detailed notes in my field journal, sketching the prints and recording the location coordinates. As I worked, the forest fell unnaturally silent. The birds stopped singing. The constant rustle of small animals in the underbrush ceased. Even the breeze seemed to hold its breath. I looked up from my notebook, suddenly aware of the silence. The hairs on the back of my neck rose. 20 yards away, just beyond the tree line, something moved. I caught only a glimpse. A dark shape taller than a man, slipping behind a massive pine. For a split second, I thought I saw eyes reflecting the midday sun, too high off the ground to belong to any recognized predator in these parts. "Hello?" I called, reaching slowly for the bear spray on my belt. "This is the Forest Service. Identify yourself." No response except the distant call of a raven, breaking the silence like a spell. Gradually, the forest sounds returned. A chickadee's call, the skitter of a squirrel, the soft sigh of wind through pine needles. I waited 15 minutes, alert and watchful, but whatever I'd seen didn't reappear. Eventually, I continued my patrol, but with a heightened awareness of my surroundings. That evening, I searched through the station's records for any similar reports. In a dusty file labeled Wildlife Observations Unclassified, I found a thin folder containing incident reports spanning several decades. Most described unusual tracks or unexplained noises, but 3 reports from the 1990s detailed sightings of an unidentified bipedal creature in the eastern section of the forest, exactly where I'd been that day. The most detailed account came from a ranger named Peterson, who described an encounter in 1997 with what he called a figure approximately 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair or fur, moving upright through the trees with surprising agility. Peterson noted that after the sighting, he experienced persistent headaches and unusual dreams for several weeks. I closed the file, unsettled. The rational part of my mind suggested a bear walking on hind legs, or perhaps an elaborate hoax by local teens. But another part, the part that had felt the weight of unseen eyes in the forest, wasn't so certain. That night, I dreamed of walking endless forest paths while something shadowed my steps, always just out of sight. I woke before dawn, drenched in sweat despite the cabin's chill. The next day brought rain, a steady downpour that limited my patrol to areas accessible by vehicle. I spent most of the afternoon at the station, catching up on paperwork and maintenance tasks. As evening approached, the rain slackened to a drizzle, and an unusual restlessness drove me back outside. I took a short trail that looped around the station, more a casual walk than a proper patrol. The forest smelled of wet earth and pine, the trees dripping softly in the gathering dusk. About half a mile from the station, I stopped abruptly. There, hanging from a low branch, was a crude arrangement of twigs and forest debris, twisted into an unnatural shape that resembled a humanoid figure. It swayed slightly in the breeze, water droplets falling from its extremities. I approached cautiously. The construction was intricate, not something casually assembled by a hiker. Small bones, presumably from rodents or birds, had been woven into the structure. Most disturbing was the small pouch made of what appeared to be animal hide, hanging at the center of the figure. With gloved hands, I carefully untied the pouch. Inside was a small collection of objects: 3 smooth black stones, a rusted key, and a yellowed photograph, partially decayed with age and moisture. I could just make out the image of a young woman standing before what looked like the ranger station, though the background was too faded to be certain. I photographed the strange effigy, then removed it from the tree, placing it and its contents in an evidence bag. Whatever this was, art installation, prank, or something more sinister, it needed documentation. Back at the station, I made a detailed entry in the logbook, attaching the photographs. I had tried the rusty key in various locks around the station, but it fit none of them. The photograph I examined under better light, but could discern no additional details beyond what I'd already observed. That night, the wind picked up, moaning through the trees surrounding the station. I found myself checking the locks twice before turning in, Jim's warning about strange sounds echoing in my mind. As I drifted toward sleep, I could have sworn I heard what sounded like singing. A woman's voice, distant and ethereal, carried on the wind. The melody was unlike anything I recognized, both beautiful and somehow wrong, as if the notes existed in spaces between the ones used in conventional music. I lay awake for hours, listening as the voice faded in and out with the gusting wind, never close enough to make out words, but persistent enough to keep sleep at bay until the early hours of morning. When I finally slept, I dreamed of following that voice through dark woods, toward a light that never grew closer no matter how fast I walked. 2 weeks into my assignment, I received my first emergency call. A hiker had failed to return from a day trip, and his concerned girlfriend had driven up to the station after being unable to reach him by cell phone. Predictably, given the lack of service throughout most of the forest, the missing hiker, Kevin Brennan, 29, experienced but not expert, had set out at dawn to explore the area around Whispering Creek. Despite Jim's warning to avoid that area, it wasn't officially off-limits, and the creek was marked on visitor maps as a point of interest. I gathered my search and rescue gear: first aid kit, extra water, emergency blanket, flares, and more substantial navigation tools than I typically carried on routine patrols. The girlfriend, Melissa, insisted on coming along despite my recommendation that she stay at the station. "I know Kevin," she said firmly, shouldering her own backpack. "If he's hurt, he might respond better to my voice than a stranger's." Her logic was sound, and she appeared well-equipped for hiking, so I relented. We set out immediately, as daylight was already beginning to fade. The trail to Whispering Creek was well-marked, but clearly less traveled than the main paths, with sections where undergrowth had begun to reclaim the trail edges. "Has Kevin hiked here before?" I asked as we walked. Melissa shook her head. "Not in Blackwood. We usually hike closer to the city, but he read about this place in some obscure hiking blog, something about unusual rock formations and perfect acoustics at the creek." I frowned. "Did he mention the name of this blog?" "Something pretentious. Paths Untraveled, or Forgotten Trails, something like that." We hiked in silence for a while, calling Kevin's name every few minutes. The forest grew denser as we approached the creek valley, the trees older and more massive, blocking much of the fading daylight. I switched on my flashlight as we descended a steep section of trail. "Listen," Melissa said, suddenly stopping in her tracks. "Do you hear that?" I paused, focusing my senses on the sounds of the forest. Beneath the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird, there was something else. A soft, continuous sound that might have been water flowing over stones, or might have been whispers just below the threshold of comprehension. "The creek," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We're getting close." The trail curved sharply downward, and suddenly we were in a narrow valley. Whispering Creek ran through its center, a modest stream no more than 10 feet across, flowing over smooth black stones. What made the place remarkable were the rock formations on either side, towering columns of dark stone that rose like sentinels, eroded into shapes that suggested figures frozen in stone. The acoustics were indeed unusual. The sound of the water seemed to amplify and echo in unexpected ways, creating an auditory illusion of whispered conversations that shifted as we moved. "Kevin," Melissa called, her voice bouncing strangely among the rock formations. We followed the creek downstream, calling regularly and checking for any sign of the missing hiker. The light was fading rapidly now, the shadows between the stone columns growing deeper and more impenetrable. After about half a mile, I spotted something on the far bank, a flash of color against the dark stones. We crossed at a shallow point, the water icy cold around our boots. Kevin's backpack lay partially hidden between two rocks, its contents scattered, as if it had been rifled through or dragged. His water bottle, smartphone, and energy bars were still there, but there was no sign of Kevin himself. "Kevin!" Melissa's voice held an edge of panic now. "Where are you?" I examined the area around the backpack, looking for tracks or any indication of which way he might have gone. The ground was mostly stone, yielding few clues, but I found traces of boot prints leading away from the creek, toward a narrow opening between two of the largest rock columns. "Wait here with his things," I told Melissa, unclipping the radio from my belt. "I'm going to check where these tracks lead. If you hear or see anything, use this." I handed her the radio and showed her the emergency channel. "I'm coming with you," she insisted, but I shook my head. "Standard procedure. If he's injured, one of us needs to stay with the coordinates while the other searches." "I won't go far," reluctantly she agreed. I followed the boot prints through the narrow passage between the rock columns, my flashlight beam seeming to dim as I entered the shadow of the stones. The passage widened into a small clearing enclosed by rock on three sides. At its center stood what appeared to be the remains of a stone structure, not natural, but clearly very old, with moss-covered blocks arranged in a rough circle. And there, sitting motionless on one of the fallen stones, was Kevin Brennan. I approached cautiously. "I'm with the Forest Service. Your girlfriend is looking for you." He didn't respond or turn. As I drew closer, I could see he was staring fixedly at something on the ground before him, his expression blank, lips moving slightly as if in silent conversation. "Kevin?" I reached for his shoulder. The moment I touched him, he startled violently, turning to me with eyes wide with fear or shock. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice hoarse. "They don't like visitors after dark." "Who doesn't?" I asked, maintaining a calm tone while quickly assessing him for injuries. Besides looking exhausted and disoriented, he seemed physically unharmed. "The ones who sing in the water." He looked past me toward the passage. I heard them singing. I followed the voices here. They showed me things. Exposure and dehydration, I thought. Possibly hypoglycemia. Classic signs of wilderness disorientation. "Your girlfriend is waiting," I said firmly, helping him to his feet. "Let's get you back to her and then out of the forest." He allowed me to lead him back through the passage, but kept looking over his shoulder, muttering about the singing ones and what they showed me. When we reached Melissa, her relief was palpable. She hugged him tightly, but he remained oddly passive. "What happened, Kev?" she asked, examining his face with concern. "You look terrible." "I heard singing," he said simply. "I had to find where it was coming from." I gave her a warning look, shaking my head slightly to discourage further questions for now. "We need to get back to the station before full dark." "Can you walk, Kevin?" He nodded vaguely. "They said you'd come." The new guardian. I chose to ignore this cryptic statement, focusing instead on the practical task of getting us all safely back to the trail. I redistributed some of Kevin's gear between my pack and Melissa's to lighten his load, and we began the ascent out of the creek valley. The return journey took twice as long as our approach. Kevin moved slowly, stopping occasionally to listen to sounds only he seemed to hear. Several times he tried to turn back, claiming they were calling him. Melissa and I had to physically guide him forward. It was well past midnight when we finally reached the ranger station. I made Kevin drink water and eat some high-calorie energy bars while I called for medical assistance. Due to our remote location, the earliest a medical team could reach us would be morning. While Melissa helped Kevin clean up and change into dry clothes, I waited I made detailed notes about the incident in the logbook. When I described the stone structure where I'd found Kevin, my pen hesitated over the page. There had been something else there, something I hadn't fully registered in my focus on the missing hiker. Markings on the stones, symbols carved into their surfaces, worn by time but still discernible. I sketched what I could remember, curved lines intersecting in patterns that suggested a script of some kind, though not one I recognized. Later, when Kevin had been settled into the station's spare room and Melissa was sitting vigil beside him, I searched through the station's historical files again. In a folder labeled Archaeological Sites Restricted, I found a faded report from 1962, describing an anomalous stone circle of unknown origin near Whispering Creek. The report included a rough sketch of the symbols I'd seen with a note, similar to markings found at 3 other sites within Blackwood, possibly related to pre-Columbian native settlements, though no tribal records acknowledge these structures. Further investigation recommended. A handwritten note at the bottom, added in different ink, simply read, "Investigation terminated by order of Regional Office, 10/17/1962, sites to be left undisturbed and unmarked on public maps." I closed the file, my scientific curiosity now fully engaged. What had happened in 1962 to halt the investigation, and why keep these sites off the maps? Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying with it what might have been the distant sound of singing. I closed the window firmly and drew the curtains, trying to focus on my report rather than the growing sense that Blackwood held secrets far stranger than folk tales and campfire stories. The medical team arrived shortly after dawn, a young paramedic named Rivera and his assistant. They examined Kevin thoroughly, diagnosed him with mild hypothermia and dehydration, and recommended he be transported to the hospital in the nearest town for observation. Before they left, Rivera pulled me aside. "This isn't the first case like this we've seen from Blackwood," he said quietly. "Hikers found disoriented talking about voices or singing." "How many cases?" I asked. 3 in the past year. "All near that creek." He hesitated. "Look, I'm not supposed to say this officially, but maybe consider closing that area to hikers. At least temporarily." I nodded. "I'll look into it." After the ambulance departed with Kevin and Melissa, I returned to the station and drafted a formal request to the regional office for temporary closure of the Whispering Creek area, citing safety concerns. I made no mention of singing voices or ancient stone circles, focusing instead on the documented cases of hiker disorientation and the difficult terrain. With that task completed, I turned my attention to a more personal investigation. The station's attic contained archives going back to the establishment of Blackwood as a national forest in the 1930s. If I wanted to understand what I was dealing with, those records might hold valuable clues. The attic was dusty and cramped, with boxes and file cabinets arranged in no discernible order. I spent hours sorting through mundane reports of forest management, visitor statistics, and weather data before finding anything of interest. In a water-damaged box labeled Personal Effects Unclaimed, I discovered a leather-bound journal. The name inside the cover was faded but legible. Margaret Chen, Field Researcher, Department of Anthropology, University of Washington, 1973-1974. The first entries detailed Dr. Chen's arrival at Blackwood to study what she called regional folklore concerning forest entities. She had been granted special access to the restricted archaeological sites based on her academic credentials. Her early notes were methodical and scholarly, recording local stories collected from towns surrounding the forest. As I read further, her entries became increasingly personal and disjointed. She described hearing singing at night and vivid dreams of walking forest paths that didn't exist on any map. By winter 1973, she was focusing exclusively on Whispering Creek and the stone structures nearby. A passage from January 1974 caught my attention. The symbols are not decorative but functional, a form of boundary marking or warning. Similar glyphs appear in disparate cultures worldwide, always associated with liminal spaces, thresholds between worlds. The singing intensifies when I attempt rubbings or photographs. Yesterday I discovered what appears to be a partial translation in the margin of a 19th century missionary's diary, found in the town archives. "Beyond this stone walks not the flesh of man, but only his dreaming self." The final entry, dated February 18, 1974, was brief and troubling. They have shown me the paths. I understand now why the Forest Service terminated the investigation. Some knowledge isn't meant for academic papers or government reports. Tonight, I follow the singing to its source. If I don't return, know that it was by choice, not misadventure. The journal ended there. I searched the box for any additional papers or notes, but found nothing. According to a faded incident report clipped to the inside back cover, Dr. Chen was reported missing on February 20th, 1974. Despite an extensive search, no trace of her was ever found except for her journal, discovered in her cabin at the ranger station. I closed the journal, deeply unsettled. The parallels to Kevin's experience were impossible to ignore. The singing, the disorientation, the strange compulsion to follow voices deeper into the forest. That afternoon, I received confirmation from the regional office approving the temporary closure of Whispering Creek. I spent the rest of the day posting closure notices at trailheads and updating the forest's limited website with the new restrictions. As dusk approached, I found myself drawn to the topographical map on the station wall. I traced the path to Whispering Creek with my finger, then noticed something odd. A faint pencil line continuing beyond the creek, into an area marked only as Wilderness Zone 14. The line meandered through unmarked terrain before ending at a small XI. Cross-reference this with the official Forest Service maps in the files. None showed any trail in that location. Only the wall map, which I now realized must have been annotated by hand at some point, indicated any path existed there. Could this be one of the paths Dr. Chen mentioned in her journal? A route not on official maps, but somehow known to whatever or whoever sang in the forest night. My scientific training warred with my growing sense that Blackwood operated according to rules not fully explained by conventional understanding. As a researcher, I'd always believed that persistent investigation could unravel any mystery. But as a ranger responsible for this forest and those who visited it, I needed to proceed with caution. That night, unable to sleep, I pulled out my personal journal and began documenting everything I'd experienced and discovered since arriving at Blackwood. If I was going to understand this place, I needed to approach it systematically, separating verifiable facts from speculation and folklore. As I wrote, the wind rose again, rattling the windows of the station. And with it came the singing, clearer now than before, a woman's voice weaving a melody that seemed to exist in the spaces between conventional notes. It rose and fell with the wind, sometimes seeming to come from the direction of the creek, sometimes from the deep forest behind the station, and sometimes from everywhere at once. Despite my resolve to remain analytical, I found myself moving to the window, drawn by the unearthly beauty of the sound. I caught myself with my hand on the door latch, ready to step outside and follow the voice into the darkness. I forced myself back to my desk, heart pounding. Whatever affected Kevin and Dr. Chen was affecting me too. I needed to maintain perspective, to remember that I was here to study and protect, not to become another mysterious disappearance in Blackwood's history. Yet even as I tried to focus on my notes, a part of me wondered, what lay at the end of that unmarked trail? What had Dr. Chen discovered that February night in 1974, and why did a part of me long to follow her path despite all rational caution? The singing continued until dawn, keeping me in a state between wakefulness and dream, where the boundaries between what I knew and what I imagined began to blur like the edge of a forest seen through morning mist. In the week following the Whispering Creek incident, I threw myself into routine ranger duties, trail maintenance, campground checks, paperwork, anything to maintain a sense of normalcy and purpose. I kept the station radio tuned to the emergency channel at all times and carried a satellite phone on patrols. Determined not to lose contact like my predecessors, the singing continued each night, but I developed strategies to resist its pull: earplugs, loud music, focused reading. Still, it infiltrated my dreams, where I walked strange paths through a version of Blackwood both familiar and profoundly altered. On the 8th day, I received a call from the hospital. Kevin Brennan had been released and was physically recovered, though he continued to report unusual dreams. More concerning, he had expressed a strong desire to return to Whispering Creek, a compulsion so intense that his doctors had prescribed mild sedatives. The call reinforced my decision to investigate further, but methodically and with proper precautions. If something in Blackwood was affecting visitors this way, I needed to understand it for their safety and increasingly, for my own peace of mind. I began by reviewing every file in the station related to unusual incidents, creating a map marking each documented occurrence. A pattern emerged. Most incidents clustered around Whispering Creek and 4 other locations forming a rough pentagon across the forest. At each point, historical records mentioned stone structures similar to the one where I'd found Kevin. Cross-referencing with Dr. Chen's journal, I found she had visited at least 3 of these sites before her disappearance. Her notes suggested they formed a kind of boundary or threshold, though to what she never clearly stated. Armed with this information, I prepared for a systematic exploration. I would visit each site in daylight, document it thoroughly, and return to the station before dusk. No matter what I discovered, I would maintain scientific objectivity and follow Forest Service safety protocols. I began with the site furthest from Whispering Creek, a location marked on my composite map as ridge stones. According to a 1957 geological survey, it contained unusual natural formations of potential archaeological interest. The hike took most of the morning, leading me through dense forest to a rocky outcropping overlooking a steep valley. There, partially concealed by vegetation, stood a semicircle of standing stones similar to those at Whispering Creek, but larger and more deliberately arranged. I photographed the site meticulously, noting the same strange symbols carved into the stone surfaces. Unlike at Whispering Creek, there was no sense of disorientation or unease, just the ordinary sounds of the forest and my own measured breathing as I worked. Over the next 3 days, I visited the remaining sites, each with its own variation of the stone structures. At each location, I collected data, took photographs, and made detailed notes, always returning to the station well before nightfall. The 4th site, marked simply as Pool on old Forest Service maps, proved most illuminating. It centered around a small, perfectly circular pond of unusually clear water, surrounded by 7 standing stones. The symbols here were better preserved than at the other sites, and I recognized patterns that repeated across all locations. As I photographed the intricate carvings, my camera suddenly malfunctioned, the screen going black despite having full battery. At that same moment, I felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a drop in temperature, a change in the quality of light. Looking up from my camera, I noticed something I had somehow overlooked upon arrival. A narrow path leading away from the stone circle, into a section of forest that appeared darker and more dense than its surroundings. The path wasn't marked on any of my maps, yet it seemed well-defined, as if frequently traveled. The rational part of my mind advised immediate departure, return to the station, report my findings, wait for daylight to explore further. But another part, the part that had been listening to the singing each night, the part that recognized the symbols from my dreams, urged me forward. I compromised with myself. I would follow the path just far enough to determine its general direction, then mark it on my map for future investigation. I checked my watch, calculated the time until sunset, and set a strict turnaround deadline. The path wound through increasingly ancient trees, their massive trunks covered in moss and lichen. The forest floor was carpeted with ferns that seemed to glow with an inner light in the dappled sunshine. Birds called overhead, but their song sounded distant and somehow altered, as if reaching me through water or thick glass. After walking for what my watch indicated was 15 minutes, I realized something unusual. The sun hadn't moved in the sky. The quality of light remained exactly as it had been when I entered the path. My watch continued to advance, but the forest itself seemed suspended in a permanent late afternoon. I should have turned back then. Every scientific and rational instinct urged caution. But the path ahead curved invitingly, and from somewhere beyond that curve came a sound I recognized instantly. The singing that had haunted my nights since arriving at Blackwood. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding strangely flat in the still air. "Is someone there?" The singing paused, then resumed, somehow conveying an invitation without words. I continued forward, rounding the curve in the path. There, in a small clearing flooded with golden light, stood a woman. Her back was to me, her long dark hair falling loose over a simple white dress. She appeared to be writing or drawing in a notebook. "Excuse me," I said, approaching cautiously. "This area is currently restricted. I'm going to have to ask you to—" She turned and I stopped mid-sentence. Her face was familiar, though I couldn't immediately place it. She smiled, seemingly unsurprised by my presence. "You found my journal?" she said, her voice the same one I'd been hearing in the night. "I knew you would." With sudden clarity, I recognized her. The same face as in the water-damaged photograph from the strange effigy. The same name written in the leather journal. Margaret Chen had been missing since 1974. Yet here she stood, appearing no older than in her photograph from nearly 50 years ago. "Dr. Chen?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears.
How is this possible?
She gestured to the space around us. Time moves differently on these paths. I've been here only moments by some measures, decades by others. She held up her notebook, and I recognized it as a continuation of the journal I'd found. "I've been waiting for you, the new guardian. There's so much to show you." "I don't understand," I said, struggling to maintain my grip on reality. "What is this place?" "What paths?" "Blackwood isn't just a forest," she explained, her eyes reflecting knowledge that seemed both ancient and immediate. "It's a threshold, a place where boundaries thin between worlds. The stones mark the gateways, the paths connect them, and the singing guides those who can hear it." "Guides them where?" I asked, though some part of me already knew the answer. "To the spaces between," she said. "To the other side of the threshold. To where I've been studying all these years." She held out her hand. "I can show you. You've already begun to see it in your dreams." I hesitated, acutely aware of standing at my own threshold, between rationality and wonder, between safety and discovery. The scientist in me demanded evidence, explanation, proof. But another part, perhaps the same part that had driven me from teaching into the wilderness, yearned to understand, to see what lay beyond the boundaries of conventional knowledge. "What about the others?" I asked. "The hikers who've been affected, like Kevin Brennan? What happens to them?" Dr. Chen's expression softened. "Not everyone is meant to cross the threshold. Some hear the singing but lack the preparation to understand what they're experiencing. It overwhelms them." She gestured toward the direction of Whispering Creek. "The stones aren't just markers, they're warnings. Protection for those who aren't ready." I took a step back, trying to process everything. "So you've been, what, living in some parallel version of Blackwood for 50 years? "Time is fluid here," she said. "I've been researching, documenting encounters between our world and what lies beyond. There are entities, not supernatural in the way folklore imagines, but existing according to different natural laws. They've been interacting with humans for millennia." She held up her journal. "I've recorded it all." The scientific part of my mind struggled to categorize what I was hearing. Interdimensional physics? Anthropological discovery? Hallucination? Yet the evidence stood before me. A woman who should be in her 70s if alive at all, looking exactly as she had in 1974, standing in a forest where time seemed to obey different rules. "Why me?" I asked finally. "You called me the new guardian. What does that mean?" "The forest chooses its own guardians," she said. "People who can perceive the threshold without crossing it completely. Not everyone who works here can hear the singing or see the paths. But you can." She stepped closer. "That's why you were assigned here. The previous guardian, Jim, recognized what you were when your application crossed his desk." This revelation stunned me. Had Jim deliberately selected me for reasons beyond my qualifications? Had he known what I would encounter here? "The forest needs protection," Dr. Chen continued. "Not just from human interference, but from misunderstanding. The entities beyond the threshold aren't malevolent, but they exist according to different rules. Interactions need supervision, and that's what you've been doing, supervising these interactions." She nodded. "Among other things, studying, recording, learning." Her eyes met mine with an intensity that was almost hypnotic. "I can't leave now. I've gone too far beyond." "But you still stand at the threshold. You can move between worlds, observe both sides, maintain the balance." The singing rose around us, no longer a single voice but a chorus, as if the forest itself was expressing approval of her words. The light in the clearing seemed to pulse with the melody. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by the cascade of revelations and possibilities. Everything I thought I understood about natural law, about reality itself, was being challenged. Yet something about Dr. Chen's explanation resonated with what I'd been experiencing since arriving at Blackwood. The sense of being watched, the dreams of alternate paths, the pull of the singing in the night. When I opened my eyes again, the decision crystallized with surprising clarity. This was why I had left academia for the wilderness, not to escape complexity but to encounter it in its purest form. To discover rather than merely teach, to experience rather than theorize. Show me, I said, reaching for her outstretched hand, not to cross over completely, but to understand. If I'm to be this guardian, I need to know what I'm protecting and from what. Dr. Chen smiled, and for a moment, I thought I saw something shift in her appearance. A glimpse of the decades she had experienced in her own way. Wisdom accumulated across a lifetime of extraordinary research. Follow me, she said, turning toward a section of the clearing I hadn't noticed before. A place where the light bent strangely around what appeared to be an opening in the very fabric of the forest. I'll show you the boundary lands where our world and theirs overlap. The entities call it the echoing wood. As we approached the shimmering boundary, the singing swelled around us. I felt both completely present in my body and somehow expanded beyond it. Aware of Blackwood not just as a forest but as a living system of connections, visible and invisible, physical and metaphysical. For the first time since arriving, I understood what Jim had truly meant when he said every forest has its stories. Blackwoods weren't merely stories but truths expressed in the only language humans had developed to describe encounters with the ineffable, myth, legend, folklore. I stepped with Dr. Chen into the light, my scientific mind recording every sensation, my ranger's instincts alert to every detail, and my human curiosity embracing the wonder of standing at the threshold of discovery. The forest, both the Blackwood I knew and the echoing wood beyond, seemed to exhale around us, a sound indistinguishable from singing. 5 months have passed since my first crossing into the boundary lands with Dr. Chen. I continue my duties as Blackwood's ranger, maintaining trails, assisting visitors, and filing the expected reports with the regional office. On paper, nothing about my position appears extraordinary, but between these mundane responsibilities, I walk other paths. I've learned to navigate the threshold spaces, to recognize the signs of thinning boundaries, to hear the distinctions in the singing that indicate different entities moving between worlds. My journal has grown thick with observations, sketches, and accounts of encounters that defy conventional categorization. Dr. Chen remains my guide and colleague, though she rarely ventures back to what she calls the solid side. Her research continues deeper in the echoing wood, where time flows according to different patterns and where entities, whose nature I'm only beginning to comprehend, share knowledge that predates human civilization. I've established new protocols for Blackwood, subtle interventions designed to keep unwary visitors away from active threshold points. The warning signs and trail closures appear entirely reasonable from a safety perspective, requiring no reference to the true nature of what they protect people from, or what they protect from people. Kevin Brennan has recovered fully, though he occasionally emails me about his persistent dreams of singing in the forest. I've learned to recognize those who, like him, have an innate sensitivity to the threshold without the capacity to comprehend it. For them, I've developed techniques to gently redirect their attention, to help them forget what they've glimpsed without trauma. Occasionally, I encounter others like myself, people drawn to Blackwood because something in them resonates with its liminal nature. For them, I serve as Jim served for me, assessing, preparing, introducing them gradually to the truth. The regional office has noted increased visitor satisfaction and decreased safety incidents under my management, leading to commendations I accept with private amusement. If they only knew that the true measure of my success is how seamlessly I maintain the balance between worlds. Tonight, as I complete my daily log with its deliberately mundane account of trail conditions and wildlife sightings, I can hear the singing beginning beyond my window. Not a call to follow blindly into the unknown, as I once feared, but an invitation to continued discovery, to deeper understanding of a universe far more complex and wondrous than my scientific training had prepared me to perceive. I close my logbook, open my journal, and prepare for another night of exploration along the paths between worlds. In becoming Blackwood's guardian, I haven't abandoned science, I've expanded its boundaries just as the forest has expanded mine. The singing rises, and I answer its call. The radio crackled to life in my small cabin, breaking the comfortable silence of early morning. Ranger Station 17, do you copy? Over. I set down my coffee mug and reached for the transmitter. 5 years as a park ranger in Olympic National Forest had taught me that unexpected calls at 5 a.m. rarely brought good news. This is Ranger Station 17. I copy over. We've got a missing hiker, college student, male, 22. Separated from his group yesterday afternoon near Blackwater Ridge. They reported him missing after he failed to return to camp by nightfall. Search team assembling at Junction Point. Can you assist? Over. Copy that. I'll gear up and head to Junction in 30. Over and out. I sighed, glancing at the worn copy of The Wendigo by Algernon Blackwood sitting on my nightstand. An old folklore professor had given it to me before I took this job, saying with an unsettling smile, "There's truth in these pages for those who work in the deep woods." At the time, I'd laughed it off. I wasn't laughing anymore. There's something about spending years in the wilderness that changes a person. The forest has its own heartbeat, its own consciousness. Most visitors never sense it. They come and go too quickly, making too much noise, seeing nothing but trees and trails. But when you live here, when you learn to move quietly and observe, you start to notice things that don't fit neatly into ranger training manuals. As I packed my gear, my mind drifted to a Reddit thread I'd stumbled across months ago. It was buried. In our park rangers, not the usual place for the unexplained. I've been a ranger for 12 years in the PNW. There are things in these woods that science can't explain. I've found footprints 3 times the size of a man's. I've heard vocalizations that made my blood run cold. Not a wolf, not a bear, not anything cataloged. And twice now, I've felt something watching me. Something intelligent, something waiting. The locals call it Sasquatch. I don't know what it is, but I know it's real. The post had hundreds of comments, many from other rangers sharing similar experiences. I'd closed the browser, disturbed not by the content but by how eerily familiar it all sounded. Slinging my pack over my shoulder, I grabbed my rifle, standard issue for predator defense, and headed for my truck. The sky was just beginning to lighten, painting the surrounding pines in shades of deep blue. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. Junction Point was a 90-minute drive along winding Forest Service roads. As I navigated the familiar route, my mind ran through search and rescue protocols. Find the last known location. Look for signs of passage. Call out. Listen. Track. The process was methodical, well established. But Blackwater Ridge had a reputation among rangers. Hikers disappeared there more frequently than in other areas of similar size and terrain. Equipment malfunctioned without explanation. Compasses spun wildly. GPS signals dropped. Even experienced backpackers reported becoming disoriented, turning around only to find themselves deeper in unfamiliar territory. The official explanation was magnetic anomalies in the underlying rock formations. That's what we told tourists and reporters. Among ourselves, we had other theories. As I approached Junction Point, I spotted the gathering of vehicles. 2 other ranger trucks, a county sheriff's SUV, and 3 volunteer search and rescue vehicles. Standard procedure for a missing person. What wasn't standard was the palpable tension in the air as I stepped out of my truck. The sheriff's deputy, a veteran named Rodriguez, was speaking quietly to the lead SAR coordinator. Both looked unusually grim. "What aren't you telling me?" I asked, approaching them. Rodriguez glanced around before speaking. "The missing kid's friends, they heard screaming last night. Not animal sounds, human, and something else they couldn't identify. And this morning, about 2 miles from their campsite, we found a boot. Just one. Torn off, looks like. Blood on it." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Mountain lion?" Rodriguez's expression told me he didn't believe that any more than I did. "Maybe, but the tracks around it. They don't match any predator in these woods." I nodded slowly, keeping my face neutral. "Let's focus on finding this kid. Whatever happened, we deal with facts, not speculation." As our search party prepared to move out, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched from the dense tree line. I glanced up at the towering pines, their tops disappearing into the morning mist. Something was waiting for us in there. I could feel it. The search grid took us deep into Blackwater Ridge territory. 6 teams, each assigned different segments, all in radio contact. The protocol was thorough, designed to cover maximum ground while ensuring no one else went missing. I was paired with a SAR volunteer named Mika, an experienced wilderness guide with 3 years of search operations under her belt. "You've been quiet," she observed as we followed a faint game trail heading northeast from the lost hiker's last known position. "Just focused," I replied, scanning the underbrush for any sign of human passage, broken twigs, disturbed leaves, anything out of the ordinary. But the forest floor told no clear story, which was unusual in itself. A panicked hiker typically leaves obvious traces. By midday, we'd covered nearly 4 miles of difficult terrain without finding a single clue. The radio occasionally crackled with updates from other teams, all negative. "I've done dozens of these searches," Mika said during a water break. "Something feels off about this one." I nodded, grateful she'd said it first. "The forest is too quiet." It was true. The typical background symphony of a healthy forest, bird song, rustling leaves, distant woodpeckers, was notably absent. We were moving through a space that felt hollowed out, expectant. As we prepared to continue, I noticed Mika staring at something on a nearby pine tree. "What is it?" She pointed to a mark about 7 feet up the trunk, a deep gouge in the bark. "Bear sign?" I approached to examine it. 4 parallel slashes, each about an inch deep in the living wood. "Too high for a black bear," I said, "and not the right pattern for a grizzly." "Mountain lion?" I traced the marks with my fingers, feeling an inexplicable sense of dread. No cat I've ever tracked leaves marks like these. We shared a look but said nothing more. What was there to say? That these were claw marks from something taller than a human? Something powerful enough to carve through thick pine bark like it was butter? We pressed on, and I couldn't help but notice we were both walking faster, checking our surroundings more frequently. The forest had changed us in the span of a single observation. An hour later, we found the first concrete evidence of our missing hiker, a water bottle half empty, lying beside a fallen log. The location made no sense. It was well off any established trail in a direction opposite from where the student's friend said he'd headed. "Why would he come this way?" Mika wondered aloud, picking up the bottle carefully by its edges. The standard procedure was to preserve potential evidence. "He wouldn't," I said quietly, "not voluntarily." I radioed our find to the command post and updated our coordinates. While Mika documented the discovery, I circled the area, looking for tracks or signs of struggle. 20 yards further, I found something that stopped me cold. A single footprint pressed deep into a patch of soft earth. But not a hiking boot or running shoe. This was a bare footprint or something that resembled one, nearly 18 inches long and proportionally wide. The impression was clear enough to make out what looked like toes, but the shape was just wrong. Too splayed, too powerful looking. I'd spent my entire career identifying animal tracks. This matched nothing in my experience. A memory surfaced, a story shared around a campfire during my first year as a ranger. An old-timer had described finding tracks like these after 3 hunters vanished in 1978. "The thing about finding Sasquatch prints," he'd said, his weathered face serious in the firelight, "is that by the time you see them, it's already seen you." I felt eyes on my back and turned slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing moved, yet the sensation persisted. A prickling awareness of being observed. The radio at my hip crackled, making me jump. "Team 3, this is command. We're getting reports of severe weather moving in fast. All teams pull back to junction point immediately. Repeat, all teams evacuate the search area." I looked up. The sky visible through the canopy had darkened dramatically. How had I not noticed? "Command, this is Team 3. We found evidence of our missing person. Request permission to continue. Negative, Team 3. Satellite shows an unprecedented system. Flash flood warnings in effect. Return immediately." I frowned. Flash floods in this terrain were rare but deadly serious. Copy that. Team 3 returning to base. As we packed up, I took one last look at the massive footprint. Without thinking, I snapped a quick photo with my phone. Evidence, I told myself, though for what I wasn't sure. The return journey felt longer, more arduous. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees in less than an hour. The wind picked up, bending the tops of towering pines like they were saplings. "We need to move faster," I told Mika, eyeing the darkening sky. But something made me hesitate, turning back toward the deeper forest. Through the trees, just at the edge of visibility, I thought I saw movement. Something large, upright, keeping pace with us from a distance. "Did you see that?" I asked, pointing. Mika squinted into the shadows. "See what?" I stared a moment longer. Nothing moved now except wind-tossed branches. "Never mind. Let's go." As we hurried back toward Junction Point, the first fat raindrops began to fall. Thunder rolled across the mountains, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the storm wasn't the only thing following us out of the deep woods. The storm hit with unexpected ferocity. By the time all search teams had returned to Junction Point, visibility was down to 30 feet, and creek beds were already swelling with runoff from the higher elevations. The search for the missing student was officially suspended until weather conditions improved. Back at my cabin that evening, I sat at my desk reviewing the day's findings. Outside, rain lashed against the windows as wind howled through the towering pines surrounding my small outpost. These storms always made the forest feel even more isolated, cutting me off from the rest of the world. I connected my phone to my laptop and transferred the photo of the strange footprint. On the larger screen, details emerged that I hadn't noticed in the field. The toes weren't just splayed. They showed clear evidence of opposable joints, almost like a massive primitive hand. And embedded in the mud beside the print was a tuft of dark hair, something I'd completely missed. Standing, I moved to the bookshelves that lined one wall of my cabin. 5 years of solitary posting had given me plenty of time for reading, and I'd developed a particular interest in regional folklore and unexplained phenomena, not something I advertised to my colleagues. But living alone in the wilderness changes your perspective on what's possible. I pulled down a worn volume titled Cryptids of the Northwest and flipped to the chapter on Sasquatch encounters. The book contained several photographs of alleged footprint casts, some dating back to the 1950s. Placing these images next to my laptop screen, the similarities were undeniable. My phone buzzed with a text message from Rodriguez. "Call me private." I dialed immediately. "I'm sending you something," he said without preamble when he answered. "Check your email in 5 minutes. Don't share this with anyone else." True to his word, an email arrived containing a video file. The footage, clearly taken from a body camera, showed a section of forest floor with several rangers and SAR personnel examining something. The camera moved closer, revealing a disturbing scene. A large area where the underbrush had been completely flattened, forming what looked like a crude nest. In the center lay a backpack, torn open, its contents scattered, and strips of fabric that had once been a jacket. Where was this? I asked when I called Rodriguez back. Team 5 found it about 3 miles southeast of where you discovered the water bottle. They were the last to return to base before the storm hit. And the blood? A pause. Lab says it's human. Type matches our missing student. I processed this information, staring at the frozen image on my screen. "What aren't you telling me?" Rodriguez sighed heavily. The backpack was 20 feet up in a tree before it was brought down. And that clearing? Those saplings weren't broken by wind or falling branches. They were twisted, literally wrenched apart by something with enormous strength. My mind flashed to the claw marks Mika and I had found. What does the official report say? Bear attack. That's what's going in the file. We both know that's not what happened. Another long pause. Listen, I've been doing this job for 22 years. I know what bear sign looks like. This was something else. I thought of the Reddit posts I'd read. The stories shared privately among rangers. They found tracks? Yeah. Similar to what you photographed but partially degraded by the rain. Large bipedal stride length over 4 feet. The implications hung in the air between us, unspoken but understood. Something was out there in our forest, something that had taken a human being. Something that the official reports would never acknowledge. The search resumes tomorrow? I asked, weather permitting. But management is already calling it a recovery operation, not a rescue. After ending the call, I returned to my research with renewed urgency. Beyond the mainstream cryptozoology books, I had collected first-hand accounts from locals, including tribal elders from the indigenous communities whose ancestors had inhabited these forests for thousands of years. One narrative in particular caught my attention, file labeled Interview with Joseph Sky Eagle, 1997. Sky Eagle, a tribal elder who had passed away in 2004, had shared stories about what his people called the Watchers in the Woods. "They have always been here," he was quoted saying. "Guardians of the deep forest. They mean no harm if left alone, but they fiercely protect their territories. When people vanish in these woods, it is often because they have crossed boundaries they cannot see, sacred spaces where humans are not welcome." I continued reading. The young men of my grandfather's generation would sometimes leave offerings at the edge of these territories. Tobacco, food, handcrafted items. A sign of respect. Those who showed respect were sometimes allowed to glimpse the watchers from a distance. Those who showed disrespect or ignorance of the old ways, some never returned. Outside, a particularly violent gust of wind slammed against my cabin, causing the lights to flicker momentarily. I moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. Rain continued to pour in sheets, visibility reduced to just a few yards beyond my porch. For a moment, I thought I saw something move at the edge of the tree line, a large, dark shape passing between trunks. I strained to see better, fogging the glass with my breath. Nothing but rain and darkness. But when I stepped back, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Among the dozens of books and papers scattered across my desk was a tribal map I'd been given years ago, showing the traditional territories and sacred sites within what was now the National Forest. There, marked clearly in faded ink, was a boundary line labeled in the native language. The rough translation: "The realm of the tall ones. Enter at your own peril." That boundary ran directly through Blackwater Ridge, precisely where our missing hiker had disappeared. As I stood contemplating this revelation, my cabin was suddenly plunged into darkness as the power failed completely. In the new silence, with the electric hum of the building gone, I could hear the forest more clearly. And something else. A sound that didn't belong to the storm. A long, low howl that was neither wolf nor coyote, nor any animal I could identify. It echoed through the mountain, somehow audible even over the raging storm. I reached for my flashlight and weapon, moving away from the window. The search would resume tomorrow. But tonight something was watching my cabin. I could feel it. Dawn broke with eerie stillness after the night's ferocious storm. The forest dripped with leftover rain, fog hanging between the trees like cotton wool. I'd barely slept, spending most of the night alternating between reviewing my research and standing watch at the windows. As I prepared to join the search teams, my satellite phone rang, the emergency line used only for urgent ranger business. "This is Station 17, I answered. "We've got another missing person." Rodriguez's voice came through, tight with tension. "One of the SAR volunteers didn't report in this morning. Mika Chen." My stomach dropped. "Mika? But she returned to base with me yesterday. According to the log, she went back out after the storm let up around midnight. Said she wanted to check something at your previous location while the rain had washed away most other tracks." I cursed under my breath. Going solo against protocol was unacceptable even for experienced personnel. "Her last radio check was at 100 hours, Rodriguez continued. "Nothing since." "I'll head straight to our previous coordinates," I said, already gathering additional gear. "Send me her last known position." 20 minutes later, I was driving through mud-slicked Forest Service roads toward Blackwater Ridge. The usual search protocols had been suspended. With one of our own missing, we were sending everyone available into the field immediately. I parked at the closest access point and continued on foot, moving swiftly but carefully through the sodden undergrowth. The forest felt different in the aftermath of the storm, more alive somehow, watchful. Water droplets fell from branches with rhythmic persistence, creating a background percussion that masked other sounds. Following my GPS, I approached the coordinates where Mika and I had discovered the strange footprint. The area looked transformed by the heavy rainfall. Depressions filled with water, new channels cut through what had been solid ground. "Mika," I called, listening intently for any response. Only forest sounds answered, the drip of water, distant bird calls resuming after the storm. I worked outward in a spiral pattern from our original discovery site. After 30 minutes of methodical searching, I found the first sign of Mika's return visit, a small orange flag marker she must have placed, the kind we use to tag evidence locations. Following the direction it indicated, I discovered 2 more flags forming a line deeper into the forest away from any established trail. The final flag stood beside what appeared to be a game trail, except it wasn't one I recognized from yesterday's search. The path, if it could be called that, was a tunnel-like opening through dense underbrush. branches broken at a height of about 7 feet, far too tall for deer or elk. The ground showed signs of recent passage, with mud disturbed in a pattern consistent with large, bipedal footprints. This was what Mika had found, a trail left by whatever had made the footprint we discovered. I hesitated, weighing my options. Protocol demanded I radio in, wait for backup. But Mika was out there somewhere, potentially injured. Or worse, I keyed my radio. "This is Ranger Station 17. I found evidence of Mika Chen's passage following an unidentified trail at these coordinates. I'm pursuing cautiously. Request backup." After receiving confirmation, I unholstered my sidearm and proceeded down the trail, moving as quietly as possible despite the wet conditions. The path wound deeper into old-growth forest, areas rarely visited even by experienced hikers. The trees here were ancient, massive trunks reaching skyward, creating a cathedral-like space with limited undergrowth. About half a mile in, I found Mika's headlamp, broken on the ground beside what was unmistakably a fresh print, identical to the one we'd photographed yesterday, but even more clearly defined in the mud. I knelt to examine it, noting the incredible depth of the impression. Whatever made this mark weighed hundreds of pounds. A sound made me freeze, a subtle crack of a branch from somewhere ahead. I rose slowly, scanning the forest with practiced eyes. There, perhaps 50 yards ahead, partially obscured by a massive cedar trunk, stood something that defied immediate categorization. Tall, easily 7 to 8 feet, with a broad silhouette covered in dark hair or fur. The figure remained mostly hidden, but I could make out what appeared to be a massive shoulder and part of a head that sat directly on those shoulders, no neck visible. I stood perfectly still, hardly breathing. Neither of us moved for what felt like minutes. Then it shifted slightly, and I caught a glimpse of eyes watching me. Intelligent eyes set deep in a face that seemed both ape-like and disturbingly human. Lowering my weapon slowly, I recalled Joseph Sky Eagle's words about respect. This was their territory. I was the intruder here. Very deliberately, I reached into my pocket and removed a protein bar, the closest thing I had to an offering. I placed it on a nearby stone, then took 3 steps backward, maintaining eye contact. The figure didn't move, but I sensed a shift in its posture, a slight relaxing. "I'm looking for my friend," I said quietly, keeping my voice even. "The woman who was with me yesterday, she came this way last night." For a moment, I felt ridiculous talking to what many would dismiss as a forest shadow or bear, but something told me this entity understood, if not my words, then my intent. The figure shifted again and then, astonishingly, raised an enormous arm and pointed deeper into the forest before melting back into the shadows with surprising grace for something so large. Heart pounding. I waited several minutes before cautiously advancing in the indicated direction. The trail widened, showing signs of regular use, a highway for whatever creatures inhabited these deep woods. 20 minutes later, I emerged into a small clearing and finally found Mika, alive but injured, propped against a tree with her legs splinted using branches and strips torn from her own jacket. "About time someone showed up," she said weakly, attempting a smile. I rushed to her side, checking her vital signs. "What happened?" "Fell into a ravine chasing evidence." She winced as I examined her clearly broken leg. Stupid rookie mistake. But then, something pulled me out, carried me here. I looked around the clearing, noting the crude but effective splint. "Something?" Mika's eyes met mine, a mixture of fear and wonder. "You know what I'm talking about. You've sensed it too. It was massive, strong. Could have killed me easily, but instead it helped me." I nodded slowly, glancing back toward the forest path. "Did it hurt the missing hiker?" Her expression darkened. "I don't think so, not directly. I found this before I fell." She handed me a waterproof camera from her pocket. "There's another search team out there, not ours. Armed men. They've been hunting in the restricted zones." I scrolled through the photos, clear images of camouflage-clad men carrying high-powered rifles and what appeared to be tranquilizer guns. "Poachers?" I asked. "Not for deer," Mika replied. I overheard them. "They're after proof, physical evidence of Sasquatch. They followed the student when he accidentally wandered into territory they were surveilling." The implications hit me immediately. The student hadn't been taken by the creature. He'd likely been injured or killed in the poachers' pursuit of their real target. As I radioed for medical evacuation for Mika, I couldn't shake the image of those intelligent eyes watching me from the shadows. This forest held secrets that defied conventional explanation, secrets that some would kill to expose, while others had learned to respect through generations of coexistence. The ancient guardians of these woods weren't the monsters. We were. The rescue helicopter touched down in a meadow half a mile from where I'd found Mika. As the medical team stabilized her for transport, I pulled Rodriguez aside, showing him the camera and explaining what she'd told me. "Unauthorized hunting party," I said, keeping my voice low. "They followed the student into restricted territory, probably caused his disappearance." Rodriguez examined the photos, his expression grim. "These aren't ordinary poachers. Look at their gear. Military-grade equipment, tactical formation. This is an organized operation." He was right. The men captured in Mika's photographs moved with precision that suggested professional training. Their weapons weren't standard hunting rifles but specialized equipment, including what appeared to be tracking devices and capture nets. "I need to find these men," I said. "They're the key to locating our missing student." Rodriguez looked skeptical. "You want to track an armed paramilitary group through remote wilderness? Alone?" "They don't know these woods like I do," I replied, "and I have a feeling they've stirred up something they can't handle." After Mika was safely evacuated, I convinced Rodriguez to let me continue alone while he coordinated with state authorities. The official search teams would focus on areas where the missing student might have fled, while I would pursue the unauthorized hunting party. Following Mika's coordinates, I headed deeper into the restricted zone, areas designated off-limits to visitors due to environmental sensitivity. The truth was more complex. These were the regions where unexplained phenomena occurred with the greatest frequency, where ranger patrols reported equipment malfunctions and disorienting experiences. The locals called them thin places, where the boundary between our world and something else grew permeable. The hunters had left an obvious trail, their heavy boots carving deep impressions in the mud. They were moving fast, no longer concerned with stealth. Something had changed in their mission parameters. By mid-afternoon, I began finding discarded equipment, a broken GPS unit, an abandoned backpack containing technical gear, a high-end thermal imaging camera smashed against a rock. Whatever expedition these men had planned was unraveling rapidly. I found the first body an hour later, a man in his 30s wearing tactical gear, lying face down beside a fallen log. No visible injuries, no sign of animal attack. His expression, frozen in death, was one of absolute terror. My radio crackled to life. "Station 17, this is command. We've located the missing student. Repeat, we've found Micah Turner alive." Relief flooded through me. "Copy that. Condition: dehydrated, minor injuries, severe disorientation. Claims he got lost trying to escape armed men who were tracking something in the forest." "Did he see what they were tracking?" A pause. "Negative. But he heard it. Says the men were all taken one by one. Command is requesting you return to base immediately." I looked down at the dead man, then at the trail continuing deeper into the forest, where 3 more armed hunters might still be operating, or being hunted. "Negative, Command. I've located 1 deceased individual, approximately 6 miles into Sector 12. Military type, heavily armed. There may be others. I need to continue." "That's a direct order to return, Ranger. Whatever's happening out there is now a federal matter. FBI and state police are en route." I switched off my radio, knowing I was violating protocol but unable to walk away. These men had invaded sacred ground, disrupted an ancient balance. And somewhere in these woods, the Guardians were responding. The trail led to a rocky outcropping overlooking a small valley. Below, nestled among ancient trees, I could make out what appeared to be stone structures. Not modern constructions, but something far older. Monolithic formations arranged in patterns that seemed deliberate, weathered by centuries of exposure. As I carefully descended toward the valley floor, I found evidence of the hunting party's final stand. Spent shell casings, torn equipment, signs of desperate flight, and blood. A lot of blood. But still no bodies. The stone formations grew more imposing as I approached. They formed a rough circle around a central clearing like sentinels standing watch. The air felt different here, heavier, charged with an energy I couldn't identify. On the ground near the largest monolith lay a journal, its leather cover stained with moisture but its contents intact. I picked it up, flipping through pages filled with meticulous notes and hand-drawn maps. Project Sentinel, read the header on the first page. Classified operation to secure biological specimen from Olympic National Forest. Subject designation, primeval hominid. The journal detailed a private research organization's multi-year surveillance of the Olympic wilderness, documenting dozens of sightings and collecting physical evidence, hair samples, footprint casts, even thermal imaging recordings of large bipedal figures moving through dense forest. They weren't poachers or thrill seekers. They were a capture team, sent to bring back proof of Sasquatch's existence for scientific study and, undoubtedly, exploitation. The final entry, dated yesterday, chilled me. Specimen tracking has led us to what appears to be a significant habitat location. Thermal imaging suggests multiple subjects. Team preparing tranquilizer protocols for primary target acquisition. Local authorities have no knowledge of our presence. I closed the journal, understanding at last what had happened. These men had followed evidence to this sacred place, this habitat or gathering site, with the intention of capturing one of the forest's ancient guardians. Instead, they had become the hunted. As darkness began to fall, I realized I needed to leave immediately if I wanted to find my way back before nightfall, but something kept me rooted to the spot, a feeling that I was meant to witness what happened here. The hair on my arms rose as a sound emerged from the forest around me. Not a howl or growl, but something more complex, a language perhaps comprised of clicks, low rumbles, and vocalizations unlike anything in my experience. They were communicating, and they were close. Slowly, I placed the journal back exactly where I'd found it. Then, remembering Joseph Sky Eagle's teachings, I removed my ranger badge and placed it beside the journal, a token, an acknowledgement of their territory and sovereignty. I understand now, I said aloud, though I felt foolish speaking to the empty clearing. This place is yours. It always has been. I won't reveal its location. Only silence answered, but the tension in the air seemed to ease slightly. As I backed away from the stone circle, preparing to begin the long hike out before full darkness fell, movement caught my eye at the forest's edge. Not just one figure this time, but three. Massive silhouettes standing just within the tree line, watching me with unmistakable intelligence. I nodded once in their direction, then turned and began hiking back toward ranger territory, civilization, and the world of humans. A world that would never know the truth about what guarded the deepest parts of these ancient forests. Some secrets, I realized, deserved to remain hidden. 3 weeks after the incidents at Blackwater Ridge, I sat across from Special Agent Diana Reeves in a sterile conference room at the Olympic National Forest headquarters. This marked my 5th interview with federal authorities, each session more pointed than the last. "Let's go over your statement once more," Reeves said, tapping her pen against a thick folder. "You pursued an unauthorized hunting party into restricted wilderness, discovered one deceased individual, found evidence of violence, and then, what? Decided to turn back without investigating further?" I maintained the calm expression I'd practiced over countless similar interrogations. As stated in my report, darkness was falling. Continuing alone would have violated safety protocols. "Yet you violated protocols by pursuing these men in the first place," she countered, "and by turning off your radio. I made a judgment call based on immediate safety concerns for potential survivors." Reeves leaned forward. 4 men disappeared in those woods, Ranger. 1 body recovered, 3 still missing. Their employer, a private research foundation with significant government contracts, is demanding answers. I met her gaze steadily. The mountains can be unforgiving. Hypothermia, predators, flash floods. Disoriented individuals make poor decisions that often prove fatal. Their equipment suggests otherwise. These weren't amateurs. No terrain respects credentials, Agent Reeves. She changed tactics. The recovered body showed no cause of death. No trauma, no evidence of animal attack, no signs of exposure or medical event. The coroner's official ruling was cardiac arrest induced by extreme fear. I said nothing. "What exactly did you see out there?" she pressed. The truth hovered between us, unspoken. I thought of the massive figures watching from the tree line, of ancient stone formations in a hidden valley, of territories marked on tribal maps with warnings passed down through generations. I saw what happens when people disrespect the wilderness, I answered carefully. Nothing more. After the interview, I drove back to my cabin, taking the long route through Forest Service roads that wound through sections of old-growth forest. The official investigation had produced predictably inconclusive results. The missing student had been found alive. His story of armed men confirmed but dismissed as a private security team conducting environmental research without proper permits. The 3 missing researchers remained officially listed as missing persons, presumed dead from environmental hazards. Their company had withdrawn all inquiries after receiving the journal I'd discovered, the same journal I'd found in the stone circle, minus several key pages detailing the exact location of the site. Mika had recovered from her injuries and transferred to another district, but not before sharing a final conversation with me that neither of us would ever report officially. You saw them too, she'd said. Not a question, but a statement. I'd nodded. The official report says I fell down a ravine. That's what happened. And something carried me to safety, splinted my leg. You're an experienced wilderness guide. You treated your own injury. She'd studied me for a long moment. Some truths aren't meant for reports, are they? As I pulled up to my cabin, the forest around me felt different than it had before that fateful search operation. Not threatening, but aware, as if the trees themselves had eyes watching and evaluating. Inside, I opened my laptop and navigated to the Reddit forum where I'd first read accounts from other rangers. Using an anonymous account, I began typing. I've been a ranger in the Olympic National Forest for 5 years. Recently, I encountered something that has changed how I view these woods forever. I won't share coordinates or specific locations, but I need to put this experience in writing, even if just to process what happened. I detailed the search operation, the footprints, the strange occurrences, careful to omit any information that might lead thrill seekers or researchers to the sacred sites. I described the feeling of being watched, the intelligent eyes in the darkness. I detailed the search operation, the footprints, the strange occurrences, careful to omit any information that might lead thrill seekers or researchers to the sacred sites. I described the feeling of being watched, the intelligent eyes in the darkness, the inexplicable help given to Mika. As I wrote, a notification appeared on my phone, a weather alert warning of an approaching storm system. Through my cabin window, I could see dark clouds gathering above the distant peaks, a familiar sight in these mountains. I finished my post with words I hoped others in my position might understand. There are guardians in these woods older than our national parks, older than our nation itself. They don't need our protection, we need theirs. If you work in wild places and encounter something beyond explanation, show respect. Leave offerings. Acknowledge boundaries. Some territories were never meant for us, and some creatures were never meant to be studied or captured or proven to exist. They are the land's first and final wardens, and we are merely guests in their domain. I hit submit, then closed my laptop. The first drops of rain began to patter against my roof as thunder rolled across the valleys. Pulling my chair closer to the window, I watched the storm sweep in, transforming the forest into a primeval landscape of shadow and sound. On my bookshelf, the worn copy of the Wendigo sat beside new editions, tribal histories, accounts of encounters spanning centuries, scientific papers on unclassified primate species. I had become a collector of possibilities, of glimpses beyond the veil of conventional understanding. The radio on my desk crackled with routine communications, weather updates, trail closures, the mundane business of forest management. Tomorrow I would return to my regular duties, file my reports, and maintain the careful balance between what I knew and what I could say. As darkness fell completely, obscuring the boundary between my small human outpost and the vast wilderness beyond, I caught a glimpse of movement at the tree line, just beyond my porch light's reach. A large shadow, upright and watchful. I didn't reach for my weapon. Instead, I raised my hand in a simple gesture of acknowledgement. The figure remained for just a moment longer, then melted into the darkness with impossible silence for something so large. I smiled to myself, no longer afraid. We had reached an understanding, the Guardians and I. Their secret was safe, and as long as I maintained that trust, so was I. The rain intensified, drumming against the roof in a soothing rhythm. Tomorrow would bring new hikers, new questions, new challenges, but tonight, I sat in peaceful alliance with the true keepers of the wilderness, respected, acknowledged, and accepted as one who understood the oldest law of the forest. Some truths belong only to those with the wisdom to protect them,